So here we are today, the three amigos. We are coming to you from around the world, between Africa and the States. Namaste for those of you that are with us. For those of you that are yet to join, Namaste, Sat Sat, Bolenat. We've got a really fascinating little conversation aligned for today. As always, we've got a lovely little threesome. We've got, well, let's first get into the concept. The concept we're going to be talking about is the Akasha, the Maya, and the Kala. And please excuse me. This thing's supposed to be on silent. Not quite sure how that happened. Oh, yes. That was my alarms. Those were my alarms from yesterday. Let's make sure that they're all off. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about the Akasha, which is often translated as space, but we're going to get into like a little bit more specifically what that represents. More like space emanates from it. Kala, which represents often called time, but it's more like the darkness from whence time arises. And of course, you know, the Maya, which is often considered as illusion, but it's more like the field of consciousness from whence the illusion arises, thinking, the mind. So yeah, we've got a great little threesome here. I'm going to go around clockwise. We've got Indy Sage. Indy Sage is he's a shadow worker amongst many other things. He's also a researcher. Obviously, that means researching etymology to anthropology to occult traditions, Taoism, Western occult, Eastern occult. And he's been through quite a lot in his life, so shadow is something he's very closely acquainted with. So, you know, when we're going to be talking about Kala, I think it's going to be right in his element. And it's an honor to have you here as always, dear brother. We've also got Cosmic Prankster, who's also another interesting character. He's someone who's been working with the Fae for a number of years and channeling a whole system of language, correspondences, cosmology, cosmogony, metaphysics, magic, I suppose, if you look at it. Sort of like John Dee. He's John Dee without a crystal ball. That's his thing. And so it's also going to be, I think, right up his alley as well, because the cosmogony and the cosmology as it relates to the breaking down of these principles was something that he spent a lot of time working with the Fae. So, yeah, and I'm Bush Whisperer. I'm a shaman, local shaman here in southern tip of Africa, Cape Town, Boulders Beach. Background in first Hermetics and Hermetic Kabbalah, and then from there, Western tradition. Then from there, got acquainted with people from Jewish Kabbalah. They're the masters of Jerusalem Kabbalah Institute from the University of Jerusalem. And Vedic practice. And that took me to shamanism, which has sort of been like calling me, I suppose, since the mid-late 90s. So there we go. We've got a lovely little threesome here. Without any ado, I'd love to give the two awesome gents speakers on our show an opportunity to just give you a little bit of a breakdown of who they are, where they're about, where you can find them. And big love to everybody.
I was muted. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Franklin, as always, and a little bit of spiel about the topic today. It should be a really fascinating topic, and I was actually learning a little bit about Kala on the way over here to get ready for the show. So it should be a very illuminating show, and we're going to be talking about some fascinating deep concepts, Vedic concepts here. Many are familiar with the illusion, the Maya, but not many are familiar with Kala, the ruler of cosmic time. And we're going to go into the distinction between cosmic time and earthly time. And then the Akasha, which we're associating with space or the ether, that holds the fabric of things to keep their place. So, and that's through different realms and different aspects and dimensions. So should be a fascinating and glorious deep discussion today. As Franklin mentioned, I do a lot of shadow work, and I've got my hands in a lot of other things. I'm very interested in the origins of things, so I work a lot in etymology, and with that comes some syncretism, also with anthropology and things of the such. So I'm very interested in the origins of language and the origins of mankind. So we should have a really fun show today. What's happening, Cosmic?
Hey, Indy, what's going on? So, I think for this topic today, I should have a lot to say because basically, what I do with my face system is it is a kind of an astral cartography, if you will, a kind of way to sort of like figure out the sort of the pieces and how the sort of the Lego blocks of existence kind of formulate themselves, and that involves looking at both space and time. I have a lot to say about both of those things. So, yeah, this should be an interesting discussion today.
Great. Well, there we go. Off into the deep end of the proverbial pool we shall be swimming. And namaste to everybody in the chat. Big love, big blessings to all of you. And I hope you're all having an absolutely fabulous day. So we're going to be talking about these concepts of space, manifestation, time. And like Indy said, you know, the ideas of what we call earthly time and cosmic time. Cosmic time, I would like to think of it more as just time. Because there's time and then there's our experience of time. That's how I often like to look at it. And our experience of time is quite a mutable thing, really. And I've noticed that depending on what state of consciousness we are in, gives us a good insight into Namaste, Vincent. Shalom, how are you doing? I hope you're good, brother. Gives us a different flow of time. Like when we're in the physical body, time seems to move fast. The more rooted into the physical we become, the faster time seems to flow. And by the more rooted into physical we become, I mean the more of our awareness is locked into the physical. When we start to shift some of our awareness into the etheric, time seems to gain dimensionality, much more of it. Seems to be a bigger field. And as we enter more of our consciousness into this becomes greater. So I consider this as the idea of time dilation. And so time dilation being, you know, what it is one step between the physical and the etheric body. And when we step into the astral body, it seems like this time dilation goes into overdrive. As you know, right? How many of you have been falling asleep, right? Having a nap, a power nap if you do that. Or waking up in the morning and you look at the clock and it's like 6:30 a.m. You fall asleep and you have this long, crazy, intense lucid dream or just a long, in-depth dream or a series of dreams. And you wake up and 1 minute's passed. And you're like, wow, you know, that was a lot of dream time. And it obviously took me a while to fall asleep and go into the dream. So that dream that you experienced was like a fragment of a second. But it would have been a whole long period of time. The etheric doesn't seem to give you so much compression, but there's definitely a compression. The etheric field is like sort of like, let's say you're crossing the road and you notice a situation that you wish you weren't in. That's when you often kick into etheric time or move more of the consciousness for self-preservation purposes and start to notice like everything's in slow motion. And the deeper you go into that, the more slow motion things become. But then when we kick past that into astral, it's like, it's beyond slow motion. It's like, yeah, you can't see the movement. In fact, you're not seeing the objects. You're outside of the body, so far away from physicality that it's just an abstract emotional trend of experience that carries, you know, this feel of time. And of course, we're going to be looking at, you know, how these three aspects of the Kala, time, and this field of consciousness that is producing mind, and how this mind is altering, diluting, shifting, and changing the nature of reality, like a filtration device. and how this produces an illusion. And so we often, I believe, incorrectly have this translation of Maya that means illusion, when it's actually more like the substance behind the process that becomes illusion. If we want to like get into what Maya really means, and Ma, the roots of mother, Iya, the roots of one of the oldest deities we know. Ya in Sanskrit is a power syllable that we intone on the end of all mantras in order to create substantiality and mass. So when the Ma, the mother, becomes more substantial and full of the body of mass, we call it the Maya. That's the principle of manifestation, essentially. And so then we've also got, this Akasha. Now, Akasha is often sort of related to space. I think we're going to get into this quite deeply. In the older Sanskrit, I've heard some of the Fakir Babas, well, a Fakir Baba that I know, to be honest, but I've heard other of the older generation also referring it to as the Kasha. And I think that must come from an older Sanskrit. I mean, we think of Sanskrit as being a language. It's a living language. There's been a certain amount of evolution within that language. So Kasha, Ka, emanations of vital essences in ancient Egyptian. The Ka body is that etheric body. But Shah represents the upward movement and the churning, the flame, the fire, churning the substance. So you could think of that as Kasha or Akasha as being the fundamental root substance from whence Kala emanates and from whence Maya is produced due to the emanations of Kala. That's an interesting way of thinking of it. You've got the Kasha or the Akasha, and then you've got the Kala emanating through this Kasha, producing the differentiation, time and space. Both time and space are related to Kala, effectively, by the way. We speak of space as being related to Akasha, but it's time and space are not so separate. And the idea of Kasha and the idea of the fundamental Kala are not separate either. In fact, these three principles are quite firmly rooted in, and you can see them as an embodiment of a trinity. And so we're going to look at this trinity as it relates to the Vedic cosmology. We're also looking at the triple goddess, by the way. I think it's quite important. And I put it in here somewhere. What did I put in here when I was writing? I only wrote this up like an hour or two ago. Been a bit busy. What did I put down here? Let's see what I wrote. It's always good to see what I wrote. So let's take a good look at the Akasha, the Maya, and the Kala, and its association with the triple goddess. Glad I didn't make any typos. Namely, Parvati, Shakti, and Kali, the trine. And so this trine is something that we see repetitively. In fact, we're going to pull up some interesting diagrams as we go. But I thought I'd kick the ball out there. Where do you guys want to start shooting? Shooting from the hips? Or shall we put a target on the wall?
When you were talking about dreams earlier, that was an important aspect of the illusion that we should be exploring. And I wanted to talk about briefly the Greek gods of dreams, and then I'm gonna go back into the Vedic goddesses and gods and their representations of these principles. But we have Hypnos being the god of sleep, and like Hypnos being an interesting name for the god of sleep. Like we're going into like a hypnotized state where you're kind of like in a daze. It's almost as if like, your spirit is going to rest, but your soul is awakened and goes into a hypnotic state, into a kind of an illusion of its own in a dream world. And so when we go into that Hypnos, there were three gods that were the sons of Hypnos, and Hypnos and Nyx, the god of night, were able to create these three gods. And the first god being Morpheus, the god of dreams of premonition. Then we have Phantasos, the god of fantasy, dreams. And then we have the god Phobator or Isolus, the dream god of nightmares. And so like they kind of break down the different realms of the dreams into like 3 different realms that are kind of a lot similar and parallel to like the druidic system, where they have like an upper and lower and central realm, which is also very parallel with a lot of other things as well. But I feel like there's a powerful understanding that they have an entire god devoted to premonitory dreams. And I personally have had dreams of premonition, and it's a fascinating thing. I've always been so curious about that, and it kind of makes me wonder how that kind of refers to the Maya, or the illusion, the foundational illusion of our entire reality, being that that it is thought in the Vedic system conceptually that we have avatars of higher beings, and that once we have self-realization, self-mastery, we could potentially raise above the illusion to the level of gods, which is another level of illusion potentially. But then ultimately we are all part of the mind of Brahma in the womb of Kali, according to the Brahmins. But the Shivites and other different divisions of the Vedic system have different views of the cosmogony, the origins of all things. So it's very interesting to see how that it all plays out in each different school of thought. But I closely follow the Brahmin school, which is very fascinating to understand that all things are an illusion of the Godhead at different levels, but are coming to finally ultimately realize that they're just Brahma still unborn in the womb, which to me is a beautiful story and kind of a poetic origin story for me. It's just very beautiful. But as far as Kala, I'm actually curious as far as whether Maya is kind of responsible for earthly time, this being part of the stronghold of the like the lowest illusion, then there being like higher illusions above it. But where we have Kala being the governor of cosmic time, this like governs the events of the gods and like divine acts and kind of timeless things, and it's very distinct from the earthly time of the mortals, which kind of for them probably seems to be happening very briefly and fastly, kind of just rushing by as events unfold, whereas their events are kind of more laid down in cosmic stone, where they kind of have like a cyclical aspect, and Kala is very responsible for the cyclical aspect of time, whereas Shiva is kind of like the lord of time, responsible and associated with Kala, and so he's like the destroyer and like changes each moment into something new. And then whereas Kala is part of this process, helps those changes and transformations maintain the cycle that they perpetuate in. And so it's a beautiful alliance that they have together, in that ushering in of the illusion for us and how things unfold here in earthly time. And then we also have, of course, the Akasha. And so I've had a past life experience before. We were brought into the halls of Akasha first, and then we stepped down into a past life experience download. And that was a beautiful place. It was a beautiful experience. And I feel like there's a lot of power to knowing that it can be a gateway. If we can visualize it in our mind and actualize it, we can potentially arrive there and depart to different places in our life experiences, potentially in past lives. So it's a beautiful thing to be able to experience that. And I wanted to just share that briefly. And we also have Yama. Yama is the god of death, which is also closely associated with Kala. But Kali is also associated with Kala. They're kind of an alliance, Kala and Kali. But Kali is more representative of time in the sense of like doomsday and death. So it's like kind of an all-devouring time. So that's some kind of a deeper aspect of time. And that's very much in alliance with Shiva, with the aspects of destruction and transformation. And I think ultimately in like the Hindu cosmogony, they have the creation that comes from a beautiful time of light and peace and perfectness, and then it kind of degrades and becomes more and more chaotic to a point in the end where it becomes totally all chaos, at which point Brahma then awakes from the nightmare and realizes it was just a dream. And I've heard that that story of the worldview of the Vedic understanding, but I'm sure there are other understandings of it as well.
Totally. That's yeah, beautiful, brother. Beautiful. That's why I actually added in here, and we're gonna end up. Okay, let's do it. You can't have any conversation about the occult at all that doesn't involve A, the enneagram, B, the enneagram, and C, the enneagram, and I mean the square of Saturn, because once again here we're going to see how fundamental. This is why these cults of Saturn, black cube cults and all of this, have become as big as what they are on Earth. Why there are these ruling powers, square of Saturn and sigil. Because that sigil is such a beautiful picture. We should always be looking at it when we are talking about it, because it gives us a sense of proportion. I don't know, I always am one to think of a picture telling 1,000 words at least, and that's on like a bad day, right? Like otherwise pictures tell a lot more than 1,000 words, really, if we get right down to it. So let's take a look. So there we go. We should have it on there. So once again, here we go. 3 principles. We're looking at the 3. And there's just no escaping it. We've got the always having these 3 principles, reality, whichever way you look at it. And, I think that this is probably so important for us to understand. I'm just pulling up another image of the Kabbalistic tree of life, because I think it might be useful as well, for us to get another image, another perspective here. Because whenever we look at things, 3 seems to be that fundamental number that sort of calls out to us, and there's no escaping it. There's no walking away from it. 500%? How did I get there? So anyway, when we look at this now, we see here the tree of life. So now we're looking at, this is Jewish Kabbalah, whether it's Hermetic Kabbalah, Jewish Kabbalah. These are just words designed to create distinction so that we don't understand what it is that we're talking about, essentially, I believe. So we've got the 3 fundamental, the first triad, right? Kether, Chokmah, and Bina. And then we've got the next triad, which is obviously Chesed and Jabura, they're calling it Dun, and Tifaret. And then we've got our next fundamental, Netzach, Hod, and Yeshut. And so these 3 fundamental triads are really the same triad of Kether, Chokmah, and Bina, reflecting itself from Atzilut into Braya, reflecting itself from the Braya triad into the Yetzirah triad, and this triad reflecting all 3 of these triads into the Malkut, where they are putting the Shekinah. Obviously, this is, I think, more like the goal, to bring Shekinah into the Malkut, to bring that divine feminine spirit in. But anyway, we'll dance around these words for now. We don't have to agree with everything in every picture. And usually it would be represented by 4 different potentials, like a cross, a spinning cross, in order to represent all 3 of these aspects. So we could now look at this and go, okay, so what have we got here? Here we've got Akasha, Maya, and Kala, effectively, right? So let's think of it. Akasha, right? That fundamental beyond point, beyond where everything is in a unified state of being that's all pervasive. It sounds very much like Kether. We get right down to it, right? And so this Kether is rooted into Kala, and rooted in, obviously, Kala representing the forces of time, and Maya rooted into this. So we can see how this triad here brings into alignment this fundamental principle. Because then we look at what we're looking at here. We're looking at the manifestation process of Maya. And we're looking at the reflections of consciousness of Kala. So I would go as far as to say that Kala and Maya, Kala then represents the wisdom, the Chokmah. This is that all these different aspects, shall we say, these different aspects of aspects and reflections of the consciousness which is really space. But the space isn't defined yet. So there's this cosmic dance between Maya, which is going to stem from the principles of cosmic time. And cosmic time, just to bring it back, into this perspective, we could be thinking about the divine order, the divine will and order of being, which is really what time is a reflection of. And then we could think of the Maya as this fundamental structure that has come into being that we are then experiencing as a reflection of Akasha and its interaction with the principle of the Kala, producing the Maya, which is like the beginning of form, you could say. So the Maya is where we start to put our thinking into it and start to create a structure of sorts. And then we see the same reflection coming back down here again and so forth. There we would see a reverberation below this particular veil of Kether once again into Parvati. And we would see this then becoming an empowered perspective where the law and the direction, which is an emanation of the divine will, moving into the more personalized will that is in response to the divine will. And then here we would see the proverbial majloth, the sphere of the elements of being, which is a reflection of Bina. And so we see this Bina reflecting in, Chokmah reflecting in, Kether reflecting in. And then we see the same process once again, and we notice how this is a interesting polarity that comes into being, right? Because there's the shift of polarities from, you could say, positive to negative, from negative to positive, right? And here we go again. We see this shift moving a reflection into Yeshut, of reflection of Tiferet, which is a reflection of Kether, Tiferet, Yeshut, which is once again the same principle of the original triad reflecting back down into the tree of life. And then here we see once again the law and the order being reflected into the netzach, into the victory, into the passions, the fundamental structuring laws that govern who we are on an emotional level. And here we see the wheels and the structure of time reflected into Chut, which is really, where the Logos is born, which is reflecting this fundamental structure of the Mazloth, which is the structuring of space. And so here we now have the left side of the tree and the right side of the tree and the middle pillar of the tree, once again reflecting the same three principles. And so we then see all three triads reflected into Malkuth, where we speak of the Shekinah becoming a complete reflection. So even when you look at it from that perspective, you see the same idea, you know, but it keeps reverberating, it keeps reflecting, and it keeps re-embodying itself in different frequencies of being. So yeah, you know, I think that's really really the crux of what we're talking about here fundamentally, when we're looking at the way in which this 3 becomes 1, becomes 3, becomes 3, becomes 9, and it's really the enneagram. And so this is why I suppose, you know, we can't have this conversation without the good old Vedic astrological chart, most classic of enneagrams, being reflected here. So here we have the middle pillar, the axis mundi, right? And this is obviously a reflection of the Akasha, right? When we want to get right down to it, because the Akasha is the eye of the storm. There is no time within the Akasha. And then we have the principles of 1, 2, and 3, which represents, you know, the upwelling. And then we have the manifestational 7, 8, and 9, which is epitomized, the etheric, by Saturn, by 8, in comparison to the other directional pulling force conceptualized by the principle of 2. And so we see here the forces of Kala and time being ruled by the principle of 8, which is quite interesting. And then we see the principles of Maya being ruled by the principles of 2. And so that brings us right back to what we were talking about before, right? The 1, 2, and the 3 of the Kabbalah. And we can see these same principles are bringing about a structure of harmony so that this thing can spin, so that we can have this axis with these two forces producing centrifuge and centripetal potential, and that this centripetal and centrifugal potentials produce the harmonic spin of what we call chakra. And so this manifestation comes into being. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful poetry when we see the way in which the structure of space-time is really truly an emanation of consciousness. And that's probably a good place for us to rest and to start thinking about, you know, consciousness, time, space, and reality. I always like to think of reality as being consciousness. I can't draw a distinction between matter and consciousness. I mean, well, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Dynamic. Now, what was the question particularly about between thought and what?
Well, the idea that we've been taught to think of consciousness and matter as being two distinct things.
Yeah.
When I think of matter, I'm thinking of consciousness. It's just, when I think of thought, I'm thinking of consciousness. When I think of emotions, consciousness. When I think of feelings, consciousness. When I think of this table, consciousness. They're just different frequencies of consciousness. And so this dynamic pattern of vibration has been tuned so that we sort of lose track and start to identify. And so there's all these writers that have gone on and on trying to create this distinction between consciousness and matter as if they're two distinctly separate things. But to me, memory exists in matter. I know I've heard you talking about this as well, Cosmic. It fits with your system, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it definitely fits with my system. Well, my whole thing is I think that matter is sort of the other side of consciousness. It's like a masculine, feminine, top down, black, white kind of thing. It's like matter, I think of it as not sort of the absence of consciousness. It's like the other side of consciousness, because obviously it seems to have an aspect of consciousness within it. Because I think the way I think of it, it's like matter couldn't contain consciousness unless it had some consciousness of its own. It's almost like we exist in the mind of matter. It's almost like matter imagines us and brings us into sort of its body. So it's like there is this kind of this, relationship between sort of like, consciousness and matter, because I think they represent two different aspects of consciousness, which is awareness and being, which is awareness being the sort of the masculine, outward projecting, seeing things, and the being sort of that internal, like, feeling state, touch, just internal feelings and sort of like weight and density. And I think so my kind of hypothesis, I think these are sort of two forces of consciousness that need to sort of be in tandem together in order for it to make sense. And when you have one without the other, it's like up without down or black without white.
Fascinating. Yeah, I have a different take on things. This is a really good question for me because it kind of brings up something that's recently been discovered, that actually bacteria tend to exhale electricity, is what people are saying, but they generate electricity through a process called extracellular electron transfer. So they're now seeing that bacteria are responsible for generating these waves, these electromagnetic frequency waves that they generate out. And I feel that mind may be partially involved with the bacteria in our cells, which are known as mitochondria. They're prokaryotic, and so they're not like a bacteria that can live outside of the human cell, but they have the same genetic shape. They have a 16 chromosome genetic circle, like all bacteria and prokaryotic beings. And so it's found that there's over 10 times as many in the neuronal cells. And so I've kind of been researching this because I've had kind of a channeling download, and it was shown to me that these are kind of the building blocks of the mind, and that they carry the clouds, the morphic resonance clouds of thought and mind in their presence. They can access through time. They have a hive mind together that they can access, and that hive mind does not only in the present, they can access through time, through the past and future, through that hive mind. So that's one of my theories that I show on my blog site. But they've actually just been showing a lot more things to back a lot of the theories that I've been shown that were channeled to me in a download in the year 2000. That's taken me decades to kind of weed out and come up with formulas for. So that's something that's really fascinated me, because they show that mitochondria are in all eukaryotic beings. So all eukaryotic organisms that are not prokaryotic, that are not bacterial by nature, have mitochondria in them. And so to me, that shows that they're kind of more primary and primal, and they can travel in the stars, that throughout the ether with no atmosphere, and they can travel uninhibited through space. So that's really fascinating. Also, they found that in nebulas out in space and stardust, that they have amino acids, which are like the building blocks of life and genetic material. So there's something there, but I personally feel like mind comes first before matter. And so in order for the divine creator to the mind to create a mind for us to have, I think he was able to create building blocks here in the cosmic realm, in the realm of the celestial bodies, so that we could have a mind of our own with the carriers of that mind potentially being microorganisms that are unseen to the human eye.
That's very interesting. I was talking very recently. Namaste, dear moon feather. I hope you are well. Sending you big love, big blessings. Hope all's good on your side of the world, with the fam, and with yourself. I was talking about. I was speaking to my girlfriend about this the other day. had to do with infrared light. After I'd done a little live with Peggy, who's the holistic nurse, and somehow I got talking about infrared light on the show. I got into the. It's one of the things. If you go and watch the Bush Whisperer Speak series, you'll see like right at the beginning, two things that come up: light and trees. Like this defines me: trees and the sun, and the sunrise and the morning, especially the morning light. Also the afternoon light going into the evening. That's where we find big love, Moonfeather, Mooney. That's where we find there's an abundance of infrared light. And the infrared light actually, it passes through the pores. So I think this had to do with what you were talking about now. By the way, India, I'm sorry if I drifted off. I get excited when I start thinking about light and infrared. But when we're talking about the nature of reality and consciousness, and how our thoughts are so powerful, and how much of what we experience is a mental phenomenon. Even though we are experiencing physical reality, we are experiencing it as a mental phenomenon. So the experience is always going to be colored by our hormones, and by our logical thinking, and by our rational thinking, and our rationalizing experiences, and the emotional qualities that we bring to an experience. Are we happy by the experience? Are we shocked? Are we afraid? Are we angered, frustrated, annoyed? Or are we brought into a state of peace? Do we feel at harmony? Do we feel joy from an experience? We get a different sense of making love to our girlfriend than what we do having to wait for something. Waiting can be quite a difficult, challenging thing to do, if we're honest with ourselves. Waiting produces a certain degree of stress, or if we're dealing with someone who's just difficult, right? You get these really difficult people in the world, and it's their goal to be as difficult as what they can be. Luckily, they usually get jobs in government offices. So if you avoid those government offices as much as you can, then you can avoid those people often, many of them. But there are some of them that fall through the web, fall through the, through the mesh, and end up, in normal land with the rest of us. And we have to suffer this. But I think when it comes to this emanations of consciousness and the sun and life, we've got to look at it like this. We're looking at it in terms of the Akasha, which is the source from whence space arises, the Maya, which is the principle and process through which the manifestations arrive, and the Kala, which are those dynamic laws that manifest and bring time into being. And I suppose you could say that Maya is the structuring of those laws. You see, Maya and Kala is the physicalizing or turning that into form, physical form. So we're talking about dream time here. And when we think about awareness, right, and perception and being, I think we're sort of touching all three of these aspects. So being is the forces of life. Prana. Prana is a reflection of Akasha. Right. We were looking at that image where we can see, the tree of life was the one that I was thinking of. So we've got the triad here. Are we on screen? Yes, we are. Great. So we've got the triad here, and then we've got the next triad, and then we've got the next triad reflecting the same three principles below the veil. And so when we take that into consideration, then we'll get an idea of what I'm getting at here. So we've got this being. We could think of being as the supernal triad. It's just being. Being is existence. And then that being gets personalized to an extent. And in that personalization of the process of being, which is universal, it becomes awareness. Like we wear it. Like where? Where do we wear it? We wear it here. So we wear here like a skin. Interesting concept. Love the way those words all twist together so beautifully. So we wear the present like a skin. In fact, that's pretty much what we're doing. Last time I checked, I'm wearing the present here like a skin. And then the process of this awareness becomes focused, tuned, and calibrated by the principles of time coming into being, into the Maya. And then we have perception. And the moment we've got perception, that's when all the nonsense starts, ladies and gentlemen. That's the beginning of the shit show, right there. Because the process of perceiving what we're aware of, affects the state of being and brings a continuity or a discontinuity of being. Oh, look at that little cute little bucket, hey? Look at that cute little bucket. Now there is a good example of being, right? Being aware. It's just an aware being. It's there. And it's not necessarily in a state of perception. Whoa, you heard me, didn't you? Now you're bringing in the perception. So yeah, there's this idea of perception, which is related to conception, right? Perception, conception, and awareness, which is related to what we're producing as space, right? And then that is time, effectively, right? And that time, which is space, is then turned into something structured, which we then experience as reality, manifestation, Maya. So there we've got it, those three principles of our human consciousness. And so we're trying to strive back towards being. And we strive back towards being by allowing our perception to rest upon the principle of awareness. And when perception rests upon the principle of awareness, there's an expansion and a contraction, because perception is a contraction and awareness is an expansion, if we think about it. So there's this expansive contraction principle happening together. But in the process of perceiving, there is an inner expansion of possibility of ideas. So they like root into each other, yang, yin, yin, yang, like all wired into series. Namaste. I hope you're good. I hope you're good, Corby. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying the day, the weekend, the end of the week. So yeah, awareness, perception, being. What are your thoughts on that? Thought I'd throw that out there. What are your ideas?
Yeah, I find that interesting. I feel like perception is like referring to like a percept, like a particular thing in reference that's being viewed. Whereas awareness is kind of just more of an openness and an awareness of not only a percept that might be trying to get your attention, but being aware of deeper awareness of the background behind it, awareness of the viewer itself, awareness of the mind of the viewer from behind the mind. So there's all these different deep depths of awareness that you don't really have with the association with perception, although it is being perceived by a deeply aware viewer. And so there is that aspect of perception there. But I feel like the connotation of perception is more, like you said, aligned with the percepts, a particular thing that's being viewed or observed, or a particular sense that's being felt. Whereas the awareness can be beyond the senses, kind of, as well, and including the senses. What do you think, Mikey Boy?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a good idea of bringing in that you mentioned the senses at all. Because the moment we're talking about the senses, we're talking about finite perceptions. The moment we're talking about awareness, we're talking about the experience of being, right? It's not quite the same as being. I know that's quite a thing to digest. That there is a difference between the experience of being and being, where being is such an innate state that possibly, like, does one even know that one is being when one is being? Or is one too busy being? And then the awareness is the recognition, oh, I'm being. And then the perception is the, like, oh, let's make sense out of what I'm experiencing here, you know? And so experience, where does experience fit into the equation between perception and awareness? Because awareness, we can experience awareness and we can experience perception. So experience becomes the transmitting factor of being. We can merely experience being. What an interesting concept. But the moment we start to consciously experience being, then it becomes awareness. And can we actually separate these three facets at all? Because to me, like, when I look at this, I'm looking at time here. I'm looking at the notion of time is really what locks us in to perception. Because awareness is quite timeless. What would you say? Would that be a better way of plugging awareness?
Yeah, I would say awareness is more timeless, like outside of the present, outside of the perception of the senses. It's beyond the veil. And I think also we have in the conscious experience, people are aware of being and have self-awareness, but they don't have full self-awareness. There's something known as the Johari window, where we don't always see all aspects of ourselves. There's aspects that we know about ourselves that others know. There's ones that others know about us that we don't know. There's ones that we know about ourselves that others don't know. And then there's things that we don't know about ourselves and others don't know either. So our awareness is limited. And even though we have that self-awareness, it's not a full awareness. And it's very distinct, though, from like a feral person that was raised by wolves that doesn't have self-awareness or recognize themselves in a mirror. And so they just kind of live impulsively and don't question their actions. They don't have to think and question anything and come up with ways that they're supposed to do things that are in conflict of their urges of what they want to do. They just act on their urges and they keep things very simple. So, and I feel like when you're in thrival and have your instincts worked out, you don't necessarily have to have consciousness. Now, consciousness is necessary when you're in a struggling state and you need to develop thrival. You have to have the freedom to be able to choose new ways, to be able to find something better for yourself, to be able to go into a place where you instinctually know how to do things that serves you and the environment. And then you no longer have to question things or remember, just kind of stay in that pattern. and become instinctual.
Yeah, I think this, like, we can't help this conversation coming back to conditioning, can we?
Yeah.
Because how much of what we experience is locked in by our conditioning. And so this causal field of time is reflecting the cause and effects perfectly, you know? That time has rhythm, and that the rhythm of time locks us in to our patterns and our cycles. For such is the nature of the world, that she's locked in to the cycles of the coming together of opposites. And in the process of these opposites coming together, there's this continuity. So namaste, Howard, and namaste, Zerilat. I hope you guys are good. Hope you guys are thriving, well, happy, jiving. Not jiving too much, but jiving. A good amount of jiving. Yeah, so like I think that's really something to consider, you know, what we call feral. It seems like feral has got the roots of the word fair, which I'm guessing has got to do with iron. Yeah, Mars. And there's a constant state of transformation inherent in the principle of what we consider as feral. I hope my audio is working well, by the way.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we think about these feral concepts, and that was not the one I was specifically looking for. Interesting that that's what I got. You know, isn't it funny when that happens? When you're like, you think you're going for one, and you end up with another. Okay, it is what it is. It's all good. I do think that it's really fundamentally important to get into a point of recognizing how much of what we think is the nature of our reality is really just this principle of conditioning. And so here we're looking at number 9, right? Mars, Fer, which is iron, and you know, the irony, and that's sort of the culmination, the completion of the enneagram, where it dives back through the eye of the storm, through where there is no number. We could call it 0 because 0 isn't a number. So we're talking about the planetary that has no number. Pluto is numberless. And diving through the eye of Pluto's proverbial storm causes a return journey back to number 1, but only now it's carrying the no number on its back as a placeholder 0. So we call it 10. And so that principle of diving through there is maybe how we lock in our conditioning. And you could think of the 1 through 8 as being the factors of conditioning. And the 1 through 8 being the factors of conditioning that implement themselves upon us. Obviously, you know, that impulsive, direct thinking nature of self-direction. And then that sensitive, empathic response to stimuli from around us, from people, from the outside. And then that being created into what we are trying to facilitate, optimize what we are getting and what we are giving. That give and take of life. 1 and 2, you could say, is give and take. 3 is then the optimizing of it. 4 then becomes the crystallization of it. So 4 is the first stage where the Hierophant rests, you know, as a concept is moving through this 4. And that's our conditioning that we're going to take on, which then is obviously going to be in a state of movement because it's not stagnant. And that movement, which is represented by number 5, Mercury, is going to find some dynamic expression of harmony of the artist, which is going to reach within us and have a change on our inner landscape, our inner thinking, most inner parts, which we are then going to work towards manifesting on the physical plane, whether we recognize it or not. And this then is going to become how we actualize ourselves and manifest the next turning of the wheel, and the cycle will spin and spin and spin. And so this is sort of, how this process seems to come into being. And these forces of conditioning really lock in our perception. And isn't it interesting how the word perception, it's got like a purse in it, hasn't it? Like, you carry around, what do you carry in your purse? You carry your change around in your purse, don't you? Right? And all the change that you've got from what you've spent, right? And what you've spent is what you've given in order to receive, 1 and 2. And this process has been an optimizing of your reality, of your conditions. And we do this for the sake, right? Number 4, we do this for the sake of balancing all the forces that need balancing. So we spend our money that we require, we need to spend in order to maintain this wheel turning. And this purse, this perception, I think are quite connected, because who we are, we carry around like loose change. And we keep spending that change and getting more change back from the change that we've spent. And so the wheel just keeps turning. And I also get the sense that, like, we don't realize, like, when we're doing it. We all do it. I think it's a natural part of being human, because how are you not supposed to be changing in a world that's in a constant state of flux, and where there's continually new possibilities and new opportunities to learn new information? And every new piece of information that we ingest, it creates form, it informs us, creates a new form in us. And that new form is modulated as a perceptual experience. And that perceptual experience drives our awareness towards finding more of that perception. And then our being becomes locked in that journey of awareness through perception. And interesting, when we think of awareness, we think of location, yeah? And perception, we think of details, right? So now we're talking about details, the tail and the awareness. You can see where you are by the holes in your head, right? Your ears, your nose, your eyes, they tell you where you are. So your awareness is your head, and your perception is your tail. And so we've got the Ouroboros sort of emanating from within us. And I think this comes back to this idea of this dance between Maya and Kala. I mean, I'm pushing this boat out pretty far, but what are your feelings? What are your thoughts? Cosmic, you've been quite quiet. Cosmically so.
Yeah, I haven't really been finding a good place where I can jump into the conversation, honestly. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot you can do with the Maya if we explore the illusion. I feel like there's the idea of like the divine realm being a higher place on a higher plane, and we have Jordan Maxwell that kind of like is the first proponent of astrotheology, as far as I know, starting to understand the teachings of the heavens. Understanding the heavens and understanding the place of God in the heavens. is very different than theology, understanding God from earth and understanding our place here from his creation. Now, as far as like there being cosmic time and earthly time, it almost gives me a feel like death is kind of an entry place to be able to journey to the higher realm. But it could also be a time where we kind of fall back into a cycle. And so in Buddhism, they kind of like strive towards getting away from that cycle of reincarnation, which a lot of people associate with like kind of like almost self-destruction. Like you're in a cycle and you perpetuate, and then you're into the nirvana, which they associate with kind of a nothingness, which they assume is to be a better place than in the perpetual cycle. But if you consider the nothingness to be maybe in cosmic time, maybe that nothingness isn't so nothing at all. Maybe there's a lot of something there. And so I feel like maybe if the mind can return to the oneness of all awareness of all being, maybe that would be considered to be the nothingness, because it's so much light in there, it's kind of darkening in some ways. But it makes me wonder, to see beyond the illusion, what do we see? What's we discover?
I think when it comes to talking about earthly time versus cosmic time, the metaphor I like to use is blowing air on a pinwheel. So if you think about like linear time, it's like you're blowing air from your mouth in a kind of like a singular line, and that's kind of like regular Earth time. But then that Earth time then correlates with the pinwheel, and then when you blow on the pinwheel, it then spins in 360 directions. So now you have one dimension of time blowing onto the pinwheel, creating a second dimension of time. And I think that earthly time and cosmic time are linked in a similar kind of relationship, where it's like there's this linear movement of this sort of this earthlier time, which then kind of spins the circular cosmic time on the higher dimensional scale. It seems like then you kind of can scale that sort of process upward and think that perhaps that two-dimensional time is blowing on something else and then creating another sort of layer of time. But it's also important that there's these two dimensions of time, but also that they have a kind of interconnected relationship, in that sort of one sort of the movement of one also kind of propels the movement of the other, albeit at maybe perhaps a slower rate than the first one. You know, maybe earthly time, it moves quickly, but then cosmic time is like some big heavy balloon that very slowly moves as you sort of blow onto it with the fast earth time. So when I think about earthly time and cosmic time, I think that's a good metaphor or analogy to kind of conceptualize it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. My friend actually came up with this idea the other day, and I'm sure people have thought of this before, but the idea that the stars could be seen as like molecules, parts of molecules and atoms themselves of higher beings. Like, and so like our part in the universe may be like on like the ankle bone of like a god or something, potentially in that kind of line of thinking. So a lot of people have always thought about the gods kind of living in the clouds, like when we kind of hear the lightning and thunder, we see lightning and hear thunder. We sometimes associate the gods are moving the furniture up in the clouds, up in the heavenly realm, things of the sort. So, but there's like kind of a deeper understanding where we could think that like these beings are much larger. But if you think about it, like in the heavenly kingdom where these beings may reside, it would make a lot more sense if their time was slower, if they were much larger than us, because you'd kind of almost think that like as you look on a smaller scale, things move at a much faster pace, and you almost need to slow it down to even be able to see it. Whereas if you look at larger things, they tend to move on a much slower pace. So I just want to throw that out there. That's just kind of a thought experiment, that kind of ways to interpret the gods and the cosmos. But it's interesting that they make a division between like divine aspect and the earthly aspect. And I feel like the cosmos is like part of like the material, but when they speak of the cosmic, it involves the divine as well. not just the material universe of the stardust and material parts, but the energetic aspect particularly.
Yeah, I like that. I really do. I heard you. Thank you. That's my son letting us know that he needs to go and pee. Thanks for that, my boy.
Echo.
Well done. You do that. Just giving me updates. Dad, I gotta go and pee. I'm like, okay, nice one. The bliss of fatherhood.
Yeah.
I like that though, when we're talking about the ideas of macrobes, you know, and the cosmic time of macrobes as they relate to, you know, the time dilation as opposed to smaller things, and how short the lifespan of an ant is compared to the lifespan of a human, compared to the lifespan of a planet, compared to the lifespan of a solar system, compared to the lifespan of a galaxy, you know, compared to the lifespan of a universe. Like, there's all these different scales, and the scales of being. I think this is something that, you know, is worth being aware of, all these gearing ratios between the more cosmic and the more mundane. And it's very interesting, you know, when we also look at this idea of Akasha. So, you know, Kasha. So Ka. Okay, let's play with the words. Play with the words a little bit. So Ka represents the vital essences. It's the etheric body of the ancient Egyptians. The Ba is the astral body, the emotional content, and the more foundational roots of who we are is the Ba. The Ka is the more the thoughts that are emanations from the feelings that become vital expressions of living movement and energy. And obviously the vital forces flow through this conduit. So think positive thoughts, think negative thoughts. That's the kind of vitality you're going to have. It's quite obvious, you know. So the Akash represents being in what we call the causal field, or the causal body. So now we're talking about the soul. This is something that you don't really hear, and I think it's an issue of translation, and I think it's also an issue of understanding of it, because when you consider the Akash, the Akashic field is where you can access your past and future lives. So if you're having a psychic experience and you're traveling up, interestingly enough, for me, the experiences of past lives often come with this feeling of going up. And then like I see the earth from up there. And then I'm like diving back down at the earth. And then I'm in this weird other place with all these other like characters doing stuff. And well, that's what it's like when I'm observing other people's past lives. When I'm like in my own, it's more abstract. But it's interesting that we can observe other people's past lives, and that we can observe our own past lives, and we can experience them, and we can remember them. And this is like when we enter into that Akashic state, when we're starting to transcend the field of time and Maya together. We're in a zone where all of the time zones meet, which is interesting. So there is no distinction between the future and the past in the state of Akash. In Akash, there just is. And the future and the past are both here. So whenever we hear about premonitions or prophecy, this is the expression of the Akash, the Akashic field, and the Akashic records hold all of this information as it's been dubbed. Don't like that word, records, because it's like it's makes it sound like it's just there, it's written down. It's a little bit more active than that. It's a little bit more alive. It's a little bit more. It's a process that's happening right now, right here. It's not just stored like written on stone and it's laying around there. Like the word gives impression, but chords that you can hold on to and pull.
I
into
see it more as
different
like
time
a
zones.
portal kind of a place. The Akashic portal. It's known as a hall, but it's really like a portal to like all times and places. I feel like really you can explore from there. It's like the hub. That's well pointed out.
It's like a Stargate.
Yeah, exactly
It's
right.
like what it is, really. Stargate, like the whole idea, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, this means that like when we're in Akashic state, we're in a field where all time zones exist. And then we're in the astral field, which is where cosmic time exists in what we call Kala. And then we're in Maya, right? Where our rational pace of time, or much more rational pace of time, exists. And then within Maya, we have octaves of Maya, I believe. I believe we have 3 octaves of Maya, sort of what we see. And it's also interesting to note as well, you know, when we look at the Maya, the Kala, and the Akasha. So when we look at Akash, right, this is something that isn't normally taken into account. But Parvati, let's look at Parvati. Let's find a picture of Parvati here somewhere. So Parvati is associated with the Akash, right? In fact, a form of Parvati. Shiva has another form of her, which is called Sati. Try and find an image of Parvati. Yeah. So Sati is effectively a different life of Parvati. Come on, man. They're showing me the Parvati Valley, which is a beautiful place. Don't get me wrong. There she is. There she is. Now tell me what tarot card you're seeing. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Where did they get this idea from?
Strength.
What were...
I'm gonna guess strength.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. There she is.
Yeah.
So there's our beautiful Parvati. And she's got little Ganesha on her lap, if you can't see the image, with his little Ganapati head. And she's sitting on her lion, her friend, her protector, her, you know. So she's very much related to the solar power, right?
Is that baby Ganesh with her?
Yes, that's exactly it. Baby
Cute.
Ganesh. Yeah.
But he
That
had
was
a,
after Shiva.
saved his mother, right?
Sorry?
He had a human head first until he saved his mother and he was beheaded and then was granted an elephant head afterwards. Was that at a young
Yeah.
age? Or eventually, maybe.
That was at when she was having a shower, a wash.
Mhm.
Shiva chopped his head off
Mm,
in a rage.
right.
And then Parvati was going to turn into Kali, and Shiva was like, hold the horses. We can't do this. Like, you will dance the universe out of being. I will give the next animal that comes past head to our boy to bring him back to life. So Ganesha represents the Christos in a way. Isn't that interesting? Because here we're talking about, like, wasn't alive and now became alive. Got given a second awakening, a second rebirth, a second head. So the head could represent, you know, being reconnected with the Akash. So we could think of the Akash, the Kala, and the Maya. And the Kala, you could say, represents the heart. Kala is also represents, you say, if something's Kala, you say it's like it's black, it's dark. If you say it's Kalia, you mean it says it's empty. Yeah? Kalia Oga. Like if you know, if you ask someone like, is there something in that pot? And they say, no, Kalia, it means it's there's nothing there, it's empty. So Kalia represents emptiness, represents darkness, represents the mysteries. And the human heart is sort of like that. I mean, if you look at the human heart, it's hollow, isn't it? It's like a hollow thing with plasma moving through it. And it's contracting in order to keep that flow running through it. And so we can see this interesting relationship here with Parvati and Akash. And Parvati represents that aspect of ourselves which is manifesting the work and manifesting what we need to take us into a state of Shiva represents perfect consciousness, that evolving consciousness that is extracting from physicality into the cosmic. And so Parvati being the consort of Shiva, and Shiva's got two consorts, Parvati and Sati. And Sati is also often related to this, where Sati is the a different incarnation of Parvati, an earlier incarnation of Parvati. This is a story where Shiva goes to Sati's family, and Sati's father was the king. No, he wasn't the king. He was a great sage. I forget his name. And Sati's mother was considered to be, I believe, the mother of the gods. And they were displeased that Shiva had come, and I believe Shiva had come in the form of Rudra. Rudra is a very scary form. Some story about Sati convincing Rudra, please change your form to something more pleasing for the guests. And takes the form of Shiva. It's like, okay, that we can deal with. Because Rudra is pretty scary. And of course, wherever Rudra goes, all the underworld goes. So yeah, we're seeing this very interesting connection with the underworld and the beings of the underworld. And Shiva's darshan is all the Rakshas, and even Asuras and the Rakshas are taking darshan with Shiva, which are like horrid giant beings, monsters, basically. And so Parvati, being the consort, represents the fundamental action of this principle, which is an abstract principle of Shiva, is abstract consciousness. To be able to withdraw one's consciousness from the body, from a state of perception into a state of pure awareness, this represents Shiva. And that process whereby this is all achieved, that's Parvati, or Sati, originally Sati. But Sati in the next incarnation came back as Parvati. So this is an interesting point of reincarnation. And so this reincarnation is what's represented by this Akashic. And it's that aspect of the soul, which is the seat of the soul, which roots into itself, so that there can be a distinction. And the distinctions are between time and space. So you could think of Akasha being beyond time and space, and that the emanations of time and space come from that. Namaste, dear Mexico. I hope you're having a lovely day. Bless you, beautiful you. And our tuition. Namaste, dear our tuition. I hope you're good. Hope you're smiling and jiving and thriving, and doing way much better than just surviving. So yeah, these interesting ideas of that Shiva principle of the extracted consciousness from matter into a state of pure awareness that transcends and becomes a state of being. And Parvati then representing that process, you could think of as Sati relating to a journey, Akash. Isn't it interesting that the word ash is on Akash? Another word is a name of Shiva called Kashi. So that's interesting. We've got another derivative name from this, stemming from the same bij, Kashi. Kashi is that aspect of Shiva that sits on the top of the mountain, and it relates to breathing. Yeah? So you could think of the Akash as the essence of life that we're actually breathing into ourselves, which we then call prana once we are breathing, once Kashi is moving through us, because Kashi also relates to breathing and the lungs and the heart. And Kashi relates to, that aspect of being Siddhi. Siddhi is another name of Shiva, which is right on the top of the mountain. So you got Siddheshwar, and you got Siddh, the Siddhi. The Siddhi are the fundamental powers, the fundamental Siddhi that you can awaken within yourself. And, Namaste, Mexico. I hope you're good. Hope you're well. How are you? How are you doing, dear Mexico? And, these Siddhi awakening and bringing these breath potentials of our Kashi into our lungs and into our hearts and our souls are essentially like where the forces of life move through. So I always think of Akash as being more related to the spirit of life, more than Kala, time, and more than the principle of Maya. And that's an interesting concept. Like, what is the difference between the forces of life, awareness, and perception? So that's quite a big question, isn't it?
What's the life?
I think all of those are aspects of life, awareness and perception. I think I'm kind of thinking about just in terms of talking about the universe instead of saying it's all consciousness or all matter, all spirit. I'm just thinking maybe it's interesting just to say it's all life. It's all this living organism thing or whatever.
Like in the 7 chakras of the law of one, like each of the chakras represents an aspect of being. And so like the root is like just being, like a rock. And then the sacral is like, I think, a living being, but very simple living being. And then the solar plexus is like a more developed living being. Maybe like a reptile, kind of fear-based living. Then I'm not sure about that. Then the heart, the green chakra of the heart space represents like a being with a conscience. Then with the blue throat chakra, we have like a being that understands their truth and can see through the lies and is able to communicate the truth to others. Then we have like a being of the indigo, which is able to see the unseen, and a being of the violet, which is able to transcend and see the divine. So we have like different levels of being and awareness. And so like there's kind of, as we spoke earlier, like a being that's not really self-aware but acts on impulse, which is very different than a being that kind of is aware of the impulses but chooses to act for the best of one and all, which is an ascended being in many people's eyes. But we have kind of the breakdown of the mind from Freud, with the ego and the super ego and the id, which kind of suggests that there is a lot there of the urges and impulses that are not being met when one is using the ego to kind of mediate the impulse world and the ought world, what you ought to do, the suggested ethical morality behaviors that you're supposed to follow versus the impulses that you want to have, which may contest with those. So that's an interesting breakdown of the mind, and it kind of shows that the civilized mind is kind of a mind that's in suffering because their impulses have not been able to be voiced or met sometimes. And so that's where kind of shadow work comes in, when we suppress our emotions that have some kind of a driving impact behind them that's really pushing us to meet some unmet urge a lot of times. And that could be many things. It could be social contact and trust, but it could also be material things, but it could also be emotional things as well. We have many needs.
Yeah, brother. I love that. I love what you both said. And very interesting when we start breaking down the chakras as well. I think there's a lot there. And what you were saying as well, cosmic, about awareness being the glove that life wears, and perception being the tool that's wielded by life's gloved hand. I don't think you said that exactly, but that's me like paraphrasing, adding to what you were saying, and that everything is an expression of the forces of life. But I think that we often forget the life principle, that the life principle is what is fundamental. And so when we think of Akasha, we think of the most fundamental state of being. It's alive. And I love that the way you put, the whole universe and everything beyond it that we can conceive of is just one big living thing, essentially. That's what we're in. We're in a living thing. And so getting into this thing here, the forces of life, the forces of awareness, and the forces of perception. So I would take the red circle and say that that's the circle of perception. And I would take the yellow circle and say that's the circle of awareness. And I would take the blue circle and say that's the circle of life. The circle of life produces the memory that carries the substance that the intuition is able to work through in order to carry the inspiration, which is the source of life. And then the awareness is holding that memory, which it then is able to imagine, conceptualize, and conceive. And this conceiving, the giving to birth of this memory, is the embodiment of the imagination that then becomes the driving function, which you could say is your will. And then this will then becomes an embodiment that reflects our instincts, and our instincts then become the crystallization of our sensations, in a sense. And so like all of these 7 chakras are sort of expressing themselves through here, and also the will holding 2 slots because it sits as the roof of one but the floor of another, and the memory as the roof of one and the floor of another. It's very interesting that when we touch Akasha, we're touching the memory. So the Akasha could be another word for memory. It's that mem, it's that watery substance from which everything is carved. And you could say that like these three aspects are really one thing. Intuition is how we experience the inspiration of life, right? And so we have to be inspired to be intuitive. Yeah. And then it activates within us memories. And those memories could be the present, the future, or the past. And so that's sort of like where I think the business of Kala starts to come into play. Because now those memories are going to be structured by the will. And the imagination's going to carry that wheel. And then that is going to become something that we instinctively relive. And so this perception is an instinct. I want you to think about that for a minute. At the heart of it. Right? We instinctively perceive things. We don't have to actually think or consciously perceive them. It's like we're locked into it. Though the awareness is something that we can imagine, right? But we're not necessarily just imagining the awareness. It takes a certain amount of conscious will to imagine the awareness and to be able to touch awareness. And to be able to reach into the Akasha, we have to reach through our memory, you know? We have to literally remember. Namaste, Bernadine. I hope you are good. Being the honey. I love it. I love it. The honey, yeah. That's what the Masons were on about. They were loving the honey and they were being, and they were building structures that reflected the mathematics of perception, you know, of awareness, of being. And so that's where the gematria and the sacred geometry comes into being. You know, I think that's like a beautiful little concept when we think about the bees. Yeah? Because the bees are like, aren't they incredible the way they are so electromagnetically switched on? You mentioned electricity earlier with the microbes. And that makes me think about bees. Because the bees also operate on an electrical principle, right? Like when they're finding honey. Well, so when they're finding the flowers that are polarized, they can be attracted like little magnets to those flowers because of positive and negative charge, right? So they like literally operate on that frequency. And I think bacteria operates on the same frequency as bees. And when we start thinking about it, ants operate on that frequency because it's how they communicate, using like electrical impulses through this hydrogen polarized medium, right? So they've got a hydrogen polarized medium, which is like depending on the consistency of how many positive and negative hydrogen is in it, I think it's a different language. So like electromagnetism obviously is like what we're talking about, your electricity, magnetism. I would say that awareness is highly magnetic and perception is highly electrical. And we elect which thoughts to think. And our emotions magnetize us and are attracted to us. And our hormones are like magnetically moving through our blood plasma system. And here's an interesting point. So I had this cool conversation with my dear girlfriend just the other night about how the calcium channels, okay, so we've got these calcium channels that are really, really important. You guys are going to dig this. You might know it. So we've got these calcium channels through which the electrical potential is transferred on a cellular level. And vitamin C is really an important part of this process for the transferal of this electrical potential. And so calcium deficiencies, this is why they're so important, right? It's not just about bones being weak. It's a whole nother story. So these calcium channels act as a doorway through which charge can move, and they move through the cells. And the red blood plasma cells are like rubbing against each other, producing a charge. And so the red blood plasma is producing charge as it's flowing, because the platelets are like rubbing over each other like this, right? And so they're producing this constant charge, and they're probably more like this, probably more like phi, golden ratio of movement through the system, because of the way that the heart contracts like that. There's 4 bands of muscle, and they contract at a different time. So the heart doesn't do that. It goes like that, then that, then that, and that, right? So it goes like that. So the fluid is pushed through like that, spirals through the ventricular systems. And anyway, the red blood plasma is generating this electrical charge. And the vitamin C is very important for facilitating and helping the ion channels, which are calcium channels essentially, to be able to conduct this electrical potential into the cells. And the cells require this electrical potential because they need to stay connected to other cells. What a concept. Because they're less likely to separate. And that high power electrical potential is what bacteria is looking for, the same as bees, right? So why do some people get ill and other people don't get ill? It's simple. It's the same way that bees find flowers, right? It's got to do with an electrical potential. If your cells have got a high electrical potential and a high supercharge, then those other bacteria things can't get between your cells because the charge is too strong. They have to go somewhere else. If the charge is weak, they can get between and they can start to siphon off some of this charge. They can create blockages and they can feed off of this electric charge. So this electric charge is like the substance of life. So we can see how the prana is moving through the electric field in the body, producing an EM field, and that EM field produces the electrical potential within the cells, which are kept in check by metabolism, which is the solar energy of the sun, which has been held and bound into a crystal form, being broken down and burnt in the proverbial furnace in order to release all that potential electrical energy that the sun has put out and the plants have transmuted into a crystal, so that we've got the energy required for our metabolic rates to keep the electrical frequencies moving. And so that comes back down to our solar plexus, obviously, very important. The fire, the triple burner, very important for the impulsiveness and the impulses within us. And of course, the digestive fire that's able to create the metabolic requirements by burning the main body's furnace to keep burning the food. And then, of course, the spleen works in alignment to decide whether that food needs to get turned into storage or burnt up to release the sugars of the sun that's bound in them. And of course, the pancreas is mitigating this process with insulin the whole time. So we can see how the human body is just such a perfect little reflection of all these electrical principles. And now when we go back to the original idea of space, manifestation, and time, we got to start thinking about electricity. What are your thoughts when we bring electricity into the conversation? Like, is it all just electricity that we're experiencing? Is space, time, and manifestation just different fluctuations of an electrical field?
Yeah, it's all vibration, so I feel like it's all electricity, and more they're finding that like the matter, the material part that's so solid is really not really that solid as we thought. And so I think just by by seeing things with new eyes, we can see things as a more energetic way. We might even be able to open up windows in the mind to be able to start to see those things more. Like some people can see auras and stuff readily, like all the time. Other people can kind of just see it every once in a while. They'll get a kind of a flash. But you can kind of train yourself to see these things. And like, I think awareness and understanding that they're there is big part of the deal, to be able to allow yourself to see those things. So should be interesting to see how that unfolds with more deeper understanding about the energetic fields that we don't necessarily see yet.
It's very interesting. I like that you use the word awareness, because I think of that too. And I'm sure Cosmic, you're probably going to agree. When you're looking into the etheric, are you perceiving it or are you becoming aware of it?
Well, I think obviously it's both, right? Because you think about like the whole idea of like, like an experience of like, I don't know, a stream or something. And let's like, you say, so it's generated from electricity. But then you think about like the ontological like nature of the experience itself. It is that also electricity too. And that's, to me, seems like a more difficult question to answer. I don't know. It's just like when it comes to any of these kind of epistemologies, when it's like we try to reduce all of reality to one particular phenomenon or substance or whatever, I just kind of like, I don't know. There's just something very kind of unsatisfying about saying everything is this, everything is electricity, everything is that, because, usually reality in terms of its experience is a lot more complicated than just simply sort of bifurcating it to some one universal, building block or whatever. With my work with Zarfexology, it really kind of makes me sort of look at and think about consciousness and experience differently, and not just to think of it as one substance, but to think of it as pertaining all sorts of different properties and types, and kind of all putting in this kind of like really complex tapestry to create the sort of the universe and the existence that we live in today. So I don't know if I feel like it's accurate to say that it's all electricity, because it's like, yeah, you got the electrical component of what basically creates physical matter, but then that begs the question, is then that internal subjective experience of it also just electricity? And I don't really know the answer to that question.
There's a very interesting thing about electricity. And I'm not talking about electricity that they've taught us is electricity, because I think they lied to us. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but consciousness interacts with electrical things. I used to play with this when I was a kid all the time. Walk down the street and see if I can make the lights turn on and off. Yeah? I'm sure you've all done that, yeah? The lights overhead, street lamps. And I used to freak people out, like say, watch this, the lights going to turn off when we walk under it. And then do it again and again and again. And then say, look back, you see that lights can turn on, and it'll turn on. And people used to get like really unnerved by this. And I used to laugh because I thought it was funny. I just realized that electricity is something, an emanation of consciousness. It is consciousness. And we think about, like, we've been taught that electricity is just this, like moving electrons, which is like really quite a crazy idea of what electricity is. It seems to me to be the substance of life and intelligent. It's the intelligence of life that's manifesting physicality. So if there's no part of God that isn't, if there's no part of matter that isn't of the divine, an emanation of the divine. So what we've got to like look at is like, is everything that's becoming physical an emanation of thought and consciousness? Right? through the principle of process of consciousness, the matter and thought. So I see consciousness as a string. On the one end, we've got thought. On the other end, we've got matter. And the string between the two is consciousness. And the substance is electrical. And the principles are electrical. And this is why when we look at like the Kabbalah, for example, right? It's really fundamentally all about these polarities. Yeah? Is it not? I mean, it's fundamentally about these electrical principles, right? Polarity. So Kether and Tiferet are polarized in a way. That's polarized with Yesod, and that's polarized. And then Bina and Chokmah are polarized in a way. Jebura or Jinn and Chesed is polarized in a way. Hut and Netzach is polarized in a way, as is Hut and Chesed, as is Netzach and Jebura, as is Netzach and Bina. No, sorry, Netzach and Chokmah, as is Hut and Bina. And so these are like all just, this is just one big map of electrical potentials. And these triangles are showing the process of polarities becoming distinct. And then when we look at this this image as well, which I think is quite beautiful and quite lovely, of this Parvati here, which represents Akasha, or was a very close representation of Akasha, since Sati is highly associated with Akasha, which is the cosmic substance. We see her sitting on the lion. Now that's that's an ode to the sun. That's an ode to Leo. And as an ode to the sun is the source of all prana. And the prana is the source of all intelligence, is the source of all of the divine emanations, which is essentially electrical. So the sun is where all the electricity comes out of, flowing and oozing. And it's also where life comes out of, right? Without the sun, there would be nothing alive. What a concept. So the sun is spewing out electricity, and because of that, we're all alive. Now, being and life, is life a reflection of electrical potential? And if life is a reflection of electrical potential, then being is the substance of life. And if being is the substance of life, then the awareness that is embodying this potential of being must also be a reflection of an electrical potential. And then we look at the word electricity, so we see like thrice, right? Thrice. Thrice. So here we go back to this other image, right? Thrice. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. And here we see them. These are the potentials of the enneagram, which is essentially thrice. Elect, what does elect mean? Elect is to vote, right? We're going to, an election. So to elect is to vote. It involves choice. The choosing of how these threes coordinate each other, right? These principles of three are really like the fundamental structure or substance of the enneagram, the substance of these three triads of the divine world of the shaman, of Bina Chokmah Keter, and the middle world of the shaman, the Chesed, Chokmah, and Tiferet, or the underworld of the shaman, the Netzach, the Hot, and the Yeshod potentials, which we could call Yetzirah, and the one above it we could call Bria, and the one above that we could call Atzilut. So when we consider those three fundamental worlds, the one above we can also call the causal field in Vedic cosmology, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about Akasha. And interesting how the word ash is a product of the word Akash, and Kash relates to breathing. Now, how do we electrify our field and maintain the movement of the air and the breath, right? Is how we're passing these electrons in and out of the system in order to keep that oxygen moving. And what is oxygen necessary for? Well, don't all electrical processes and principles require a certain amount of this? Because isn't electricity, fire and burning the same thing if we look at it fundamentally? Yeah. So you could think of electricity as cold fire because we're controlling the rate of flame. But so the sun is burning and producing electricity. And so we could think of this process of the sun. Is the sun just a ball of rock throwing out electricity like they've taught us? Or is the sun alive? And if the sun is alive, then is the electricity alive too? This is really what I mean when I speak about electricity. Is electricity alive? And if electricity is alive, then what does that say about the substance of everything? If electricity is alive, then atoms are really just emanations of electricity, right? That means that the atoms are alive and intelligent, because if they're an emanation of something that's alive and intelligent, then they have to be alive and intelligent because they're an emanation of a living intelligence. So I think this is an interesting concept, because when we look at extraterrestrial technology, they speak about how there's no controls, right? We engage with the electrical field with our thoughts. And that there's two different types of electricity. We're only aware of one type of electricity in a very mundane way. We haven't realized what it is. This is why we don't understand what the pyramids are, right? If we understood what the pyramids were, then we would maybe have a more comprehensive perspective of the intelligence behind the electrical principles of life, and that you can siphon off this electrical field. And maybe this is what Tesla was getting at. Maybe that's why Tesla was embodying all the information from the, from the enneagram, effectively, when he was talking about the fundamental principles of where is it? Of this. So I hope I got it up there. Yeah. So the 369, whichever way you look at it, it's going to come up there. And we're going to see that 369 coming up here as well, 936. And then you add up the 3 plus the 9 is 12 plus 6 is 18 is 9. Then you got 5, 1 and 4 is 5, plus 7 is 12, which is 3. So we've got 9 and 3. And then we've got 8 plus 2 is 10, plus 5 is 15, which is 6. So we've got one triangle of 9, one triangle of 3, and one triangle of 6. And the fundamental first triangle is 9, 3, and 6. So isn't that interesting, when we see the way that this sort of manifests? 369, 369 represented here. And that's what Tesla was on about. Now, this is not just the substance of matter. This is the substance of who we are. This is the substance of how the planets interact with us. These are the archetypal forces that make us who we are. But this is also how you can understand electricity. So if the universe is truly an expanding spiral of possibility that reflects phi in all directions, and the electrical potential is also governed by the same principle, then it has to be alive. And if it is alive, then it has to be the fundamental conduit of life, as expressed on the physical field. So that's sort of like where I am. What do you think about that, Cosmic? As to look at electricity from that perspective? Okay, maybe Cosmic stepped out for a sandwich break. But yeah, I do think that we've got some very limiting ideas in our current knowledge base. Sorry, there you are, dear brother. I was going to say, what do you think about that notion of electricity?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom to it, and I feel like there's a lot of insight to the triangles there in the Enneagram that make like a different teams kind of thing, where there's like a real resonance between the connections of those blue triangles. But I really feel the 369 energy resonance. That's powerful stuff right there. And I know that there was said that Tesla energy was said to be in such a way that it was symmetrical electrical grids, which they teach you in electrical engineering is impossible and that you can't do and that would never work and that you shouldn't do that. And so if you talk to people that are indoctrinated, they'll teach you against trying to even attempt it. But apparently that was one of the trade secrets. Symmetrical electrical grids will allow 369 to happen.
Yeah, man, makes me think about Feng Shui, doesn't it? We've got dear Zerilath who's come to join us. Welcome, dear brother Zerilath. For those of you that don't know him, he's a Magus. He works with the ruins, with tarot, with different forms of magic and occult practices. Very much associated with what I call the druids of the old Norse tradition. Because I think of them as druids. You know, what's the difference? They're all very similar in their languages and what they're producing in terms of thought. So he's got those Norse roots, dig down deep into Yggdrasil's soil bed. Welcome, dear brother. It's an honor to have you. And he's got a podcasting channel too, which is in my list of suggested podcasting channels. This Zerilath Speaks. If you just scroll through there, you'll see his thing. Welcome, dear brother.
Yeah. Zerilath Eternal is the channel. Yeah. Thank you. You guys can hear me, right? Yes. Good stuff. I've been in quite a place. Just I did my readings with Stein about an hour ago, and then I had to decompress. Went through some meditation. I've been listening and acclimating myself to the conversation. I love these these correlations within the discussion of the numerology within the single digit code, and working on that and keeping that straight, right? Because what's unconventional for someone doing the Norse pagan thing is to also implicitly do things like add in things like the chelantic sciences, which has been I've been trying to get more of their vernacular under my radar, because that's the stuff that the tree of life that I come to is located, and is all aspected with the psychosomatic northern soul complex, which is each of these 9 on the Enneagram correspondent to the 9 parts of the soul in the Northern tradition. And so that stuff gets me very excited. It's a deep aspect of understanding ourselves, right? Through this clarified reconstruction of the Enneagram, what you're doing and what other friends of ours are doing is tremendous. And so, like, I always end up looking in on all the different triangles because of that 3-6-9. Looking at that and saying, okay, what's all connected to 3, 6, and 9? Okay, so it's a triangle. That's fascinating. And so these attributes correspondent. Got it. And it makes me wonder as to all the ways that operate within, I suppose one could call it psychological law, that this system can be customized. Like, what if you could triangulate different things, right? Especially because I think almost in terms, I was thinking to myself while looking at the 9 characters around the circle, and I said to myself, where's the warrior, right? Because I've been meditating a lot on the aspects of the what are the 4? It's these 4 personality types of the warrior, the wizard, the king, and the lover, or something to that effect, right? And so and so I would have thought to myself, okay, the adventurer, I think, would be the closest thing to the warrior. However, that also, but the warrior doesn't feel like a 5 at the same time, right? So those were contemplations that I was inspired and thinking about as listening to the show, and trying to keep up with everything. Because I know you've given this a lot of thought. Some of it I may have already heard the answer and forgotten. You're muted.
I was just asking my boy to stop because he's giving me reports of everything that's going on, and I'm like, it's not the time, my boy. Where's the time? 8:12. Okay, this is why he's giving me reports, because he knows like bedtime's coming. He knows I spoke to him about this earlier, and he's worried about daddy taking action. Consequences, just because it's his birthday tomorrow doesn't mean he gets to stay up all night. He'll be 9. He's one step closer to staying up all night. Let's put it that way. A little step. But yeah, man, it's interesting. You speak about the warrior, and when I think of a warrior, I think of number 9. In German, the word for no is nein, right? Which means like, you shall not pass. Thou shall not pass. 9.
Right. And 9 is the activist in your system.
Sorry?
I said 9's the activist in your system.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the embodiment of Mars. And so Mars is the planet that's associated with the number 9. This is like the Chaldean, numerological system. The same in India. And so 9 represents, like, this is the one that's going to complete things. This is going to end the crap. There's a whole dispute happening, right? Yeah. And this is the one that's going to go out there and end the dispute. Number 9 ends the story, if that makes sense. It's like, it's very fundamental, it's action. It's pure action. I think that's what Mars represents, doesn't it?
Right. Well, I'd say we're looking at catalyst, right? Because, we easily look at all manner of violent behavior towards men, fights, battles, wars, other aggressions. But, you know, it's ultimately about initiation of will and conflict of will between others. And so the catalyst is kind of what you'd be looking at in that respect, right? Like when I was reading the Jewish war, the catalyst for the burning of the temple, according to Josephus's accounts, and I don't think it's been contested, is that one Roman soldier broke orders because he was just pissed off at the way everything was going and hated everything about it. And he threw a torch. He attacked, he struck, he made the zealots panic, and then the zealots counter-struck, and thus all of Rome's plans to save the temple were destroyed by a Roman soldier's instigations because he finally said, fuck this. Right? That's what Josephus says happened. I can believe it. Now, I think there must have been a shadow, because the way that whole move goes down, the whole story made me think of the death of Balder, where the temple is Balder, and the soldier is the blind god, and then someone among the ranks is whispering the encouragement to strike the blow. Right? You know, like reading that chapter particularly was like reading a Jewish Ragnarok.
Yeah, I would say catalyst. That's interesting. When you say the word catalyst, it makes me think of the number 9. Because 9 doesn't... when you add 9 to any score of numbers, it doesn't actually change the numerology. Specifically. Right? Like, you can add 9 to 5 and you've got 14. But it produces an evolution of numbers that brings you back to the same number. So it catalyzes change without changing, which is, I suppose, like, in a sense, what we're talking about as a catalyst. Because a catalyst is something you put into a chemical reaction. You don't want it to change the outcome of the reaction, do you? You just want it to make sure that the reaction's happening.
Yeah.
So, you know,
it's there to create the condition within time and space. It's like the Hadron Collider, right? They want their Higgs boson God particles, so alleged they call it. And they need this whole goddamn thing that takes up half of Europe to freaking smash some fucking particles together until a certain catalysted energy type happens by the random chance they have deterministically destroyed their future with, because they don't respect the weird. King, warrior, magician, lover. Yeah, I was just about right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting, you know, that you bring up those archetypes, because king, warrior, magician, lover, you know, you could almost say that the king is the warrior, isn't he? In a sense, like the first warrior. He was the one who stepped up first, and then others were like, "We're going to step up with him." So if there's going to be a war, the king's going to be the first one to step onto the battlefield, and he's going to have his hordes behind him. You know, a real king, like the Viking kings. They didn't hide in the buildings with the women while the men were out fighting the wars, did they?
Right.
They were out there in the fray. I think, like, in later times, like, it got a little bit weird, you know, because they had pansy kings from France.
The nature of warfare was becoming so impersonal. The danger of so many things taking out a leader that needs to hold so many responsibilities is part of a bloodline situation, and perhaps his kid ain't ready yet, and he ain't got a whole lot of kids yet, or what, like all sorts of things get in there, and that's when kings started being more like on the backside of the situation. And I think that probably had a lot to do with advisors, not the kings themselves, but it grooms a softness, because, you know, as the people look and see that, well, being on the front line isn't really the qualities a king needs anymore. We can fucking bitch and complain about getting a bloodline that isn't such a brute, because now we don't have to have a brute all the time, because he's not the one on the line every war, right? So now you can get political kings coming into the fray, beginning to weaken the integrity of the thing as society is growing, changing, becoming ever more complex. Especially with how you're going to keep pagans and Christians happy as the power structure is still in flux.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. You know, when we put that into perspective, that flux and these cycles of the time that we're experiencing, which is really producing the flux. And flux is again, isn't that an electrical term? Yeah,
Flux
am I right? Sorry.
Flux capacitor was used in for time travel in a lot of science fiction. It's like a device from electrical.
The flux capacitor, I think, is only in Back to the Future. I don't know it in any other science fiction, at least not popular science fiction.
There's another one. That's the other one's kind of more of a kind of like a B movie. But they do use that concept in multiple films.
Right.
But a flux is definitely something that's used in like mathematics and electric stuff for sure. But I wanted to mention something. There's you know, we were talking about Saturn a lot, who was also, you know, the governor of time in many ways, Father Time. But I wanted to point something out and ask a question. I know that Saturnalia occurred like during like the dark time of the year, from like the 17th to the 23rd, where sun starts to and then eventually goes to the furthest point away and gets the we have like the shortest day very soon after that. And they kind of switched it up on us. We used to have that pagan celebration of Saturn during the time when there's a significant movement of the sun, and it gets diminished. So why were we celebrating Saturn during that time? Does anybody here know or understand why that was occurring? But it's interesting now they've kind of went from like the Devourer of Children celebration to Happy Little Baby Jesus celebration.
And of course, Jesus was a Capricorn.
Yeah.
No, he wasn't. He was a Sagittarius. No, he was a Capricorn. Of course, he was a Capricorn.
Technically, wait, wasn't he technically cusping Sag Cap? Because he's we're talking about, yeah, because we're talking about celebrating his birthday on just a couple days after the solstice, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cusping, but yeah, he's a Capricorn, right? He has to be a Capricorn if you expect him to be the Lamb of God. Christians, that's my fun. That's my laugh. That's my joke. Christians that have been demonizing goats. Oh no. Yes, we worship a lamb as you know, we worship a Lamb of God over here. You worship a guy who calls himself a Lamb of God. He doesn't even have horns. Our guy's an actual lamb. I think you got it wrong, mate.
That's well pointed out.
I found flux in my etymological Indo-European dictionary. And so before even it was used as an electrical term, it was used this way. It goes back to BEU, or BEU or BEU. I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's spelled BEU, which is also BHEL or BHLEU. So BEU or Behel or Bleu, like blue, right? Swelling, flowing, flowering, from Greek, phallos or phallus, ithithalic, ithi meaning erect, carried at festival of Bacchus. So flux is a Bacchic thing in the Greek. Phallus imputicus, the stinkhorn fungus from its shape. Let's see, fool on Greek. So yeah, so in effect, let's see. Here's a Roman god. Okay, Flora, Roman goddess of flowers, versus Faunus, god of nature. Faunus, that's going to be Pan. That's going to be Pan, right? So flux. So it's like, you having an orgasm is you fluxing, because we're talking about flowers. We're talking about erect penises. We're talking about fertility gods, right? So flux is a life force energy thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes back to what we were talking about, what electricity is and life force. And that we think electricity is just this stuff where, and you can see how that has sort of grown into modern context where they define it as a flow of something through a surface, specifically electric flux. They're speaking about here as a measurement of electric field passing through a given area. It's not an actual flow of particles, but rather a way to quantify the strength and direction of an electric field. So when you think about a phallus, right, the potential of the masculine, like upstanding, tower, that would then be a reflection of potential. So I think flux means potential to move through barriers, right? Especially when, like, we're talking about, and coming back to the Saturn thing as well. Saturn was originally the green man. So Saturn has the scythe because of being a reaper of grain. So in traditional times, very ancient times, your reaping cycles were related to Saturn, and the reaping of the reaping of wheat. Namaste, dear Cosmic. I hope you're well. I hope you're good. The reaping of grain was a celebration of Saturn, and so that's why Saturn's the reaper, and that's why the green man represents nature, and Saturn represents nature. So Saturn was a nature deity. So there might have been certain crops that you would reap before winter. I don't know. Does that make sense? And certain,
Yeah.
That's the Capricorn sign for the solstice.
So think of here. I'll think of this. One of the things that's hidden within Jesus is a Saturnalian blood sacrifice ritual from Rome, right? This is the what's it called? Something about the fool. Shoot, sometimes I forget the name of this star and say it's a particular Saturnalian tradition, right? They would do, it would be like the purge, right? There would be a flipped rules where Rome would basically nullify certain laws for the slaves, and then one of the slaves would be allowed to go buck wild and be like the clown prince of crime. He'd be, they'd find like a Joker kind of character, right? Like Batman universe, kind of like an inherent allowance of a supervillain to rise from amongst their slaves that are, bitter little cunts, right? Why are they doing this, right? They need this fool to be arrested and sacrificed for his crimes to Kronos on the solstice to bring back the sun, because it is understood that even though not Pluto the planet, but Pluto the deity has beaten Sol Invictus in the annual war between the two, and the only way to save Sol Invictus is to sacrifice this fool this king of the fools to him, and then the sun will slowly regain its victory over the realm, right? And so there were cults running a climate change grift to convince people to support this tradition.
So not much has changed, is what you're
Not
saying.
much has changed at all. Go check out my read of the Jewish War if you want to hear me actually just reading the book with my own personal annotations. It was Antifa woke craziness. And the book ends saying, don't build the second temple. Don't put anything religious on that site at all. The zealots will get all sorts of crazy ideas.
And yeah, we were thinking we invented wokeness. Yeah, no, it's really makes you wonder, just how much of our history is just a woke adventure or a woke misadventure.
It's the unconscious resistance against the projection of the demiurge from the powers of authority behind government and behind the hierophantic institutions of the world. And it's designed to catch you in this trap where you're going to be in need of a savior after you made a jackass of yourself chasing sin. Right? This is the lesson of Pleasure Island in Pinocchio. Right? You're a kid playing in Toyland for an entire generation. Now you're an adult in debt and you gotta go fucking work the coal mines. And you sound like a jackass. And woe is me. And, this is the way people are when they're when they've made their habits their entire personality.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to electricity a little bit. We could. I know that the most times when we have electricity is because an atom is losing an electron shell. And so as atoms lose their electron shells, they become isotopes. But sometimes atoms can actually gain electrons. And so noble gases tend to do this more because they have like 5+ valence electron shells. So they're trying to fill the octet of 8, and it's easier for them to gain 1 to 3 electrons to balance out and fill the shell. But interestingly, most of the time, atoms lose electrons and they eventually break down into their half-lives and become isotopes. And over time, they typically don't gain any unless they're noble gases. So kind of like seems like as electricity happens and as things kind of unravel and get like exciting, things start to like unravel and dissipate, and eventually will like kind of fizzle out. It's like when do things kind of gain that power back? I don't know, maybe the stars create that power again. When the nebulas coalesce.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, It's sort of like this Gnostic idea that we come from somewhere else, yeah? And we've come here. And our souls come from somewhere else. And the Christians have like wonderfully embodied this idea, And so when you think about it, okay, so like where does the electricity come from? Does that make sense? Where does the intelligent design, and potential, and force, and all of that, like, nothing can be created or destroyed. So there must be this synchronous something that keeps the wheel turning. You know, like you got a car, you need something to start that engine turning, right? And so the idea is that like this impulse comes from elsewhere into this universe, and now this electricity is moving. And so we're literally living in this electrical universe. And so I would go as far as to say that maybe when we talk about Akash, we're talking about the electro field through which consciousness and life moves, prana. And time becomes an emanation of this, which then manifests and materializes as this dream of life, Maya. But like, what is its source? Can it run out? What an interesting concept. Yeah.
Right now, the holy grail in quantum physics is who can establish the definitive unified field theory. Right, that's the big prize right now in quantum physics. Is one of the big prizes is finding a unified field theory that agrees with everybody in their peer system, right? To become the theory that they say is what they're going to enforce, right? Note that I'm saying theory here, right? Because look at how like they enforce theories through their officialdom's peer review, right? This is why we've had a hard time, trying to get any progress on any of the esoteric sciences, giving us a carbon neutral technology system by which to establish a type 1 civilization. Right, but we can't seem to get ourselves to 0 point energy. We can't seem to get ourselves to anti-gravity, etc., etc. Right, because we have to accept the theory of gravity. Right, there's the definition of gravity, which is the phenomenon of things being compelled towards larger bodies, or whatnot, that we identify the phenomenon of gravity as, versus the theory, which is the mathematical equation about mass and such. You go and you look up the definition of gravity. They don't tell you what it is in basic human language in a Webster's dictionary. They proceed it by this mathematical equation is gravity. Gravity is not math. Gravity is the phenomenon of this. That's gravity. The math is trying to explain what happened on a quantified scale by measuring it. But that doesn't help me in language talk about gravity, the word.
I love the way they mistake theory for hypothesis, or the way they...
Yes!
Like... They speak about Einstein's theory. That wasn't a theory. That was a hypothesis. It's like
everything
it's
quantum
like
is
he dreamt it up.
Yeah,
theory needs solid evidence.
Is a hypothesis, because right now all the scientism, the quantum, you got the astrophysicists, quantum physicists, right? Like, and an astrophysicist is still working with like measurable things, right? Measurable energies. Quantum is getting, is trying to subdivide what, they're trying to imagine stuff that's there as measurement points to get beyond what we're capable of measuring. So there's nothing to test because it's all on fucking paper, because they haven't fucking gotten to the unified field theory yet to go beyond. Because the unified field theory would be effectively to find the actual, like, retinal scan of God. This is, here's all the blood vessels of the eye of God in the permeable membrane of the universe that is within you and around you.
Yeah, I have personal theory of physics, that would kind of be a unified field theory that could explain gravity amongst a lot of other things, in the sense that it explains matter to be bundled ether or wrinkled space was what I first call it. And this was kind of something I discovered in a kind of Gnostic channeling experience where it kind of just came to me. I was watching a lecture by Alan Watts about Buddhism and science, and I started to realize that if all is one, then perhaps that is why matter acts the way it does, because when this supposed Big Bang happened, which we can trace back to, things got shooken up so much that matter has been unraveling space ever since. And so I feel like what happens is it needs to go through stages of unraveling, and it is bundled ether that unravels as a thread and then goes and is engulfed by black holes and then emits from the black holes and its poles as strings, and those strings become dark matter, and that dark matter becomes dark energy, and that dark energy finally expands back into the ether. And so it ultimately makes the universe constantly expand as it unravels. And it explains how gravity happens, because space is attracted to wrinkled space more than regular space because it's kind of bundling on itself.
Right.
Also, it explains how kind of atoms kind of break down into their half-lives and tend to lose electron shells over time and unravel. So it kind of brings a lot of things into perspective as I've kind of gone through it to analyze it. I found a lot of consistency with some of the thought experiments that I've done, but it's just a postulate. Really, at this point, it's not really even a hypothesis or a theory. You could potentially call the hypothesis or a postulate.
Well, the funny thing is that the science and physics and the energies, which is also correspondent with the magics going on, it all, I feel that it all fits beautifully, which is why I had to get around to reading the book, was Martin Heidegger's Being in Time and his explanation of all of these things when it comes to making meaningful sense of the existential aspect of everything we know of how we orient the world that we don't see, that is right outside of our perception in our hearts, right? Just like I have a whole orientation, imagination sitting in this room, that there's a certain neighborhood that looks a certain way when I look out a window, when I look out a door from within my Saturnian cube universe in which I work, live, and build in, right? So I go out there, and if I see things that make no orientatable sense to me because all the architecture is different, the fauna and mineral composure is different, the weather doesn't make any sense, and people are speaking languages that I've never heard in my neighborhood ever, and fluently, and as the norm is that, I will have realized that I have been transported to another world. Something is amiss when I went through the portal of my home today. Right? That's very correspondent. Like the Kybellion to me continues to be, proven that regardless of what you think, the three initiates and the publishers of the book, that the Kybellion, the substance of the facts of what they say are those ancient teachings, are valid law. The all and the all is mind in the manner in which that all operates. And that gets connected to my field.
This is something that I have noticed, which is it's a big deal. And, to quote the Slick Dissident, he likes to call science a seance. And I like that too. It is a bit of a seance. We should get out our crystal balls and get like some candles going. Time to talk science. But there are a lot of these notions, and you speak about the Kybalion, and everybody knocks the Kybalion, but they probably haven't really read it, right? Because when you sit down with it and you actually read it, you have to go, wow. this is reflecting a lot of truths from every different cult system. And it's not just one system, ideology, that holds these fundamental principles. You know, it's Hermetics, but it's also in Kabbalah, it's also in Vedic systems. It's whichever pathway you look at of spiritual avenue of sciences, you find there's a lot of truth there. Now, here's what gets me. It's obvious to me that this huge counterintelligence push towards discrediting certain pieces of information. They don't want people reading the Kabbalah, so they discredit it, right? They don't want people reading Stitchin, so they discredit it. They don't want people reading David Icke, so they make him out to be, you know, CIA operative, counterintelligence. Of course he's counterintelligence, right? Right from the beginning, he's been warning us about how there's a secret cabal manipulating the government, and how there's extra-dimensional beings that are possessing human beings that are like lizard beings, and how our government is being compromised, how our financial system is compromised, how our legislative system's compromised. He used to be in news. That's actually what he was, right? David Icke. He was originally a reporter and a journalist. And he speaks about how he had to leave journalism because journalism wasn't honest enough for him. That journalism wasn't real, that it was a bit of a sham. So how could you be like this guy? This is for like 30 years. This guy has been basically telling us to not trust the news because it's rigged, to not trust our governments because it's rigged, to not trust the financial system because it's rigged. And now suddenly he's a CIA operative? Like, really? Like, you know, if he was counterintelligence, then he's done the most harm to the system, more than any of the harm that you could probably see from most people, because, you know, I came in contact with David Icke in, what was it, 1990, 91, you know, and he had a big effect on me with that Robot Rebellion. I was like, wow, you know, finally somebody who's telling it as it is, right? We are being moved to become like robots. He was talking about transhumanism in the 80s, right? And that we are being prepped mentally to become like AI machines. And so he's been like on the cutting edge of really giving really powerful information, which is now, I think, become normalized. But he's like suddenly, he's the bad guy, right? He's obviously counterintelligence. And when we speak about the Kabbalion, I think it's the same truth. Here's the other part that blows my mind, right? There are a lot of people that I know, I've got a lot of love, a lot of respect for them. But it's like I have this conversation with someone else, right? There's information that's being put out there now by our circles of people that are misleading people, in my opinion, right? So there's these beliefs that Egypt didn't exist, that Egypt wasn't real. It was actually in America. That all the evidence was planted in Egypt. That's such a cool little dude, man. Look at him. Yeah, let's see how he likes. I hope he doesn't get all struffy now that he's like, you know, oh, I'm on center stage. Look at his little face.
Yeah,
He's
cool
so
stuff.
cool, man. He looks like a little rock star, man. Total little rock star. So yeah, you know, just looking at the way in which this has sort of come to be, is we're now supposed to believe that okay, so Egypt wasn't real. Egypt doesn't exist. Egypt was in America. Then the same narrative by the same people are telling us that that was all just made up history. Okay, we need to throw that baby in the bathwater. Then Phoenicia, that's all made up history. It's all lies. It was all in America. Okay? Then China, that was all lies. All Chinese history, it's all in Pakistan. It was all in America.
Your audio has gone robot.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like the sound of robots.
Just got to fix your signal.
Saying too much. Is it better?
No, not yet. Try to see if it's Jack.
Yeah. Oh, hold on a minute. Let me try this. Is that better? Is that okay? Or is it still a robot? Robot? Let me go and check my settings.
That sounds good. I think it's better now.
I think it was getting feedback from your mic.
Yeah.
And that sometimes happens. But yeah, so we're supposed to believe that this is like just normal, and that all these histories have now. So what they want us to do in the alternative community is rewrite history in the present because somebody in the past changed our history. So because somebody in the past changed our history, we must now throw all the history out. We must throw it out, baby, with the bathwater. Write off all history and invent a brand new history right now, right here. And this is what people are doing. Instead of looking at the middle path and going, well, maybe there's been lies in history. There has been. Maybe there's been manipulation. Maybe there's been doctoring of timelines and changing of things. But I still think that Egypt is in Egypt, right? I think there was a global empire on the planet, if empire is the right word, a worldwide civilization that has been and gone and been, and that there have been epochs upon epochs of ancient civilizations that have spanned the world. And maybe 10,000 years ago there was one, maybe 20,000 years ago there was one, maybe 50,000 years ago there was one, maybe 150,000 years ago there was one, maybe 800,000 years ago there was one. This is they're finding this evidence in Israel of sites 850,000 years old, showing signs of civilization, but they couldn't have been normal structures, of course. But 2,000 years is a long time. They're using wood. So, you know, seems like there's a lot of this being put out there.
Sounds like you're back. Well, your sound's starting to get weird, but I think you got better. But yeah, the timelines of these ruins are very questionable, and I think a lot of people have already come to accept the fact that in the Incan ruins, they're actually a pre-Incan ruin that the Incans later inhabited. And they show the Incan builders had built with these really small blocks on top of the pre-Incan builds, which had no mortar and were massively huge megalithic blocks. So, you know, it's questionable as to what went on there. Where did those civilizations go? You know, maybe a deluge situation. They were wiped out. Maybe a mud flood situation. They sunk into the mud. Who knows what happened? The military has built weapons that can kind of make things sink into the mud, but it's not to say that that kind of vibration could not come upon us as a result of like a supernova or something. Somewhere in the galaxy, for example. I don't know. Maybe an impact.
The Egypt thing is largely like we were regrouping in Egypt, effectively in the Middle East after Cataclysm, right? That's where we're trying to put the world back together. And I kind of want to say that we are looking at like more of that Atlantean technology leftover situation, which is why we're getting so much like it's not Egypt. It's just that Egypt was like a center point for building around one of these Atlantean sites that had the pyramids in it.
Yeah, the name of ancient Egypt it's known to be Al-Kem, or Cometian, but a lot of people trace it back to Al-Kimu, and that means the colony of Mu. And so it's like Zerloth just mentioned, it's thought that Egypt is kind of a place of refuge for the colony of Mu, which later is known as Lemuria by Philip Sclatter in the late 19th century. But the colony of Mu, in the sense that a lot of the earlier pharaohs came from Lemuria and were giants, and like Akhenaten had kind of elongated skulls, and then over time, after interbreeding with others, they probably had O negative blood, so they probably couldn't really interbreed much, and
Right.
they had a lot of problems with inbreeding issues. That resulted, especially towards the time of like Tutankhamun.
That's right. That's because that's all the 17th dynasty. Akhenaten's dynasty forward was highly compromised. This is why his son is named Seti, right? Because he was a Setite. Setite is Set is not just a trickster god, an anti-god, but he's also the god of foreigners, right? And so this is the outside of the ordinary Egyptian bloodlines being brought in, and with it, various kinds of compromises, including disputes over heritage. Right, the Seti First Temple, which is infamous by idiots in ufology for being evidence of ancient Apache helicopters. It's ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous, right? It's just like it's hieroglyphs. They're just hieroglyphs. They've been chiseled over by other hieroglyphs, and the translation of both versions is accurate and makes sense because there's context along that wall, because that used to be Akhenaten's temple. And then Seti took the temple and he chiseled out that part because it was one of Akhenaten's parts. And he replaced it with his own. So he just had someone chisel it over, kind of sloppy like, to say like, I am Seti the first, the whatever rulers of the land. The other one was like Akhenaten, the great conqueror of the chariots, or there was some specific like attestation of their conquest of note, of their claim to kingliness, if you will, to pharaohness. And that's what was being scripted out. So, you know, it's if anything, it's evidence of son in rebellion against father.
And it's said that that Isis and Osiris lived for an extremely long time, much longer than humans, through many ages, and that the people noticed that they were able to live through many ages and that they were more godlier. And then over time, the pharaohs became like more like the humans and did not live as long and became of smaller stature. But I'm not sure if there was always both, that they were always giants and of great longevity. It could have been different lines that had one or the other, and maybe others that potentially had both.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually went to go and look. I hope you guys can hear me now. I hope that's sounding better. Let me just make sure that there's no feedback on the mics. Everybody good? Yeah, hope that's clear. So I was taking a couple of notes. I was watching a little bit of a YouTube. That was really interesting. So there are these people that claim to have been underneath the pyramids after scans, and that they have seen these things, right? These structures underneath the pyramids. And this is not a new phenomenon. And so Diodorus Siculus, 1st century BC, he was I think he was he a historian, Greek? He wrote about how this labyrinth that was built for the king in Crete, right? What was the king's name? King Minos of Crete, was a copy of a much grander labyrinth that was underneath the pyramids in Egypt. He wrote that. And he said that the pyramids were much grander. And so we're talking about the labyrinth where the Minotaur was supposedly stored in Crete. That was apparently copied from Egypt's labyrinth underneath the pyramids, which are whole cities down there. Then Herodotus, 5 BC, was also speaking of a labyrinth underneath the pyramids. And he was talking about how the scale was grander below than above. That there's a pyramid down there and that there's buildings underneath. And I promise you, Joshua, if I hear your voice one more time, so help me God, I'm going to start selling your stuff in Facebook Marketplace. Do you understand me? Be quiet and go away, please. And then come and get into bed. Not another word from you, okay? He keeps coming and shouting at my door. He needs to know where the line is. So Herodotus mentioned this as well. And he speaks of the grandeur and scale of that which is built beneath the pyramids. Then the histories of Herodotus mentioned quite a lot. There's also Strabo. Strabo, what was he? I think he was a Greek geographer from the just before BC, maybe 60, 50 BC or something. He had also, these are all people that claimed to have gone underneath the pyramids and seen great things in a great labyrinth underneath the pyramids. Now, recently, there's been these scans that have been done, right? That we've heard so much about, that show that there's a lot underneath the pyramids. And you know how many debunkers there are, right? But these people that are debunking it are debunking the so-called modern people that say that they've got this on record, that they've got some kind of, I think they've taken satellite scales, I think they've used different kinds of scalar technology to scan into the earth, finding mines, finding gold, finding oil, and they can tell you that there's definitely a lot of structures and something underneath the pyramids. They can't say exactly what it is, but it's unusual. And it's sort of all of these historians that I've mentioned here, and I think there are more of them, that have actually gone on record as, and all of these people that I read here, you can go look at their work. Yeah, I bet you can Google it and find out which books they are, the names I mentioned, and which books they wrote about it in. These are all people that claimed to have actually gone in to the ground. So to me, this speaks about epochs, right? Like you say, yeah, that a regroup, but maybe they came to regroup in a place where there had been an older civilization that was covered up, right, by sand and ocean, like floods. And if you dig down, you're going to find another civilization. And probably if you dig under that civilization, you'll probably find an even older, grander civilization. And I mean, we've got the same thing in Turkey, haven't we? Where they've got older civilizations that can be tracked underneath other archaeological digs. And they've actually been banned. Göbekli Tepe. Did I say that right? Göbekli Tepe, sorry. And they've actually been banned for 20 years from being allowed to actually excavate it. Because what the scans show is that there are more structures underneath the structures that we know about. It's as if people come back to build structures upon familiar places. Like imagine New York was covered, right?
Didn't
yeah.
I was going to say, didn't one of these globalist organizations took over the site? Wasn't it like the WEF, the World Economic Forum, or George Soros or something like that? One of these guys, they stepped in.
I don't know the details, but I heard that there were globalists involved.
Yeah, there are. I just can't remember which ones, but note that there are. And this is Turkey, right? So anything happening in Turkey is going to draw context either from during or before the Ottoman Empire, that's rediscovering a lot of missing history for the Turkic people.
Anyway, I'm glad I took those few notes of those names, because these are people I thought I want to research when I've got the time, you know, to go and look into these people, because it was in a fairly, I can't remember what documentary it was, not documentary, but which podcast it was, but he was pretty grounded and pretty down to earth in the way he was looking at things. So I thought, maybe worth following these breadcrumbs. But I reckon that this is a, do I still sound numpty? Oh man. Okay, let me take a look. Okay. So in the chat, do I still sound numpty now? I'm going to go into my settings of audio and take a look and see what is happening here. And is that better? Is that better? Is that better? Is that better? Is that better or is that worse?
Not as good. I think more.
Is it getting worse?
Yeah, it's got more.
It sounds like it's picking up. It might be too sensitive. I can hear my voice in the background, actually.
Yeah, I normally, when you guys are talking, I turn my mic off. Is that better? Okay, I had to go and play with the settings. I had to go and tweak up the settings. But there we go. What did I do? So I basically turned on those things. So this is one of the things that annoys me, right? I didn't change my mic settings in the beginning of this podcast, and it was fine, right? Through the whole podcast. And then StreamYard goes through some kind of a settings change, and suddenly there's a problem. This is why I'm going to go to OBS, everybody out there. This nonsense is going to be finished, because I think this has got to do with I had to unplug my mic, my camera. I wonder if that's what caused the problem. But anyway, it's did you say no, it's not better, my cherry? Is it worse? You guys, it sounds okay for you guys, yeah?
No, all of a sudden you became golden, and you've been golden since I gave you the thumbs up there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. So I normally turn off all the AI assistive stuff in this, and then I had to turn it on, which is weird. Sometimes when it's on, it creates a problem. But yeah, that's like, thanks, Tojoka. So I think like this is a typical thing that we're experiencing, and a lot of our information is being promoted. Stuff that's not cool is being promoted. Do you know how many people come to me saying that Crowley is a prophet? And I'm like, the dude was a magician. He was a philosopher. There was some good information. But to be honest, like a lot of the way he changed things, I'm like, yeah, take it or leave it. You know? There are a lot of other authors that seem to be more grounded than he was. He didn't seem that grounded to me. And to me, like a good sign of spiritual development on any practice that you're using, you'd be more grounded, wouldn't you? You'd be like together, physically grounded. I think it's an important thing. So it's just really interesting how the woke agenda is changing our knowledge, changing our history, controlling our archaeology, because they don't want us to know the scale of time. I think when we go and look at Göbekli Tepe, we're going to find out that the history probably goes back to like 50,000 years or something. Yeah, for the ones underneath. And it's probably going to break the bank of all of the historians. And there are going to be a lot of PhDs and doctorates that are going to be pretty much worthless, right? Because they based their whole career on nonsense. You know? So you can imagine it's going to cause a bit of a shaky sensation.
Something I wanted to say was like a little bit of sympathy for the devil, right? With Crowley, right? Crowley, he did a lot of black magic, right? So when I say sympathy for the devil, I'm not trying to say like he did nothing wrong. But what I am saying is that the man did wrong things, but I think he was a guy that like he's like a pseudo trust fund baby, like a low tier trust fund baby, right? Like if you look at his background, he was able to, he had the luxury of sustaining himself from some family investments in his future, right? And he was probably trapped in this world of basically he's surrounded by the harsh morality of the life in the Anglican church, right? Like the church, like, morality, British Christian morality, right? And which condemns us right now doing what we're doing as being equivalently evil in many respects to Aleister Crowley, right? So we have a lot of very naive people judging his morality. Very, very naive people judging his morality, because I'm not saying he's a good man. But what I am saying is that he wanted to break through the idea of what is the application of magic in the 20th century to any extent, right? Because I can look at seeing a pattern of Crowley magic and saying, okay, I see what he did there. I would love to put magic in the world that way, but I don't want to put that magic in the world that way, because I have better intentions than him, right? But you learned a thing from a guy who not only was doing that, but in very Age of Aquarius style was innovating the hybridization. Not too many people before Thelema were taking magical traditions of Kabbalah and magical traditions of anything else and mixing them together, right? And finding things from the Norse and the Chinese and the yada, yada, yada. Now New Agers do it, and they're doing what I just said. They're doing what Aleister Crowley did their own way, with none of the darkness, right? Their own airy-fairy failures, but we're all human beings. They're going to fail like that, right? And then we can get into the microscope and dissect the actual things that he did, because he might have been an MI5 agent. He may have been there to serve the Jews in some capacity. Whatever little conspiracies need to be discussed about the particulars of what he was doing. But as far as the way he put his magic out there, some of it was good. Some of it was evil. All of it was him exploring a freedom from being told no all the time because of people that didn't know how to be loyal to God and cultivate a true, like as a child would know. What do you do when a child is raised and is devoid of certain, like there's just not enough laughter in the family, yada, yada, yada. Right? These are the interesting elements to consider, because we have our own true sense, our inner sense of right and wrong. I can look at a book of black magic and it's not going to make me feel compelled to do anything in that book, at least anything that I would recognize as a horrible, evil thing to do that the Most High would frown upon. That's normally how people are. Some people are evil or apathetic to it. Anyway, that's my spiel.
And I agree with you. Like when we look at the moral thing, that's one story. But I'm gonna show you one thing that always bugged me. And this is like, there are a few of these. You'll see them in the book 777. There's like a few little places where, okay, so like let's look at like one of the really this is quite an old this is the Piedmontese tarot deck from Silesia, 1865. Yeah. So this is a very old one. Notice that the wheel is turning clockwise, right? Oh, sorry. Maybe I should put it on the screen. Please excuse me. So here we've got this very old tarot trump, right? Which is the Piedmontese tarot deck, Silesia, 1865. And we can see that the wheel is turning clockwise, right? But we can see there's a continuity of the turning of the wheel, right? We can see the angel on the top is facing that direction. We can see the one that's falling down the wheel is going head first. So you can see that everything is moving in the same direction. So the continuity of chakra, of the turning of the sky and the universe, is being maintained as a concept, which is what the wheel represents. Then we look at, a Rider-Waite's, right? Now we've got the same idea. Okay, the wheel is turning anti-clockwise, but we've got the same idea of the snake's going down, he's going up, he's facing that direction, right? So it shows us the continuity of a wheel turning. Now look at this one. This wheel can't turn. Don't know if you noticed that. There's no way that wheel can turn because one of the creatures is going in the opposite direction of the other two creatures. Now, people will try and make excuses for this and say, oh, well, it's slowing down, or it's this, or it's that. Or the fact is that what this trump symbolizes is chakra, is the causal turning and revolving of the heavens, and that these things will work in divine cycles. The moment you start messing with the symbolism in this card, you start changing the meaning, right? So like that card has always bugged me. It's one of the reasons I don't really use my Crowley deck very often. Don't get me wrong, I love the deck. It's the most beautiful, most inspiring deck because the artist that did that deck was incredible. Crowley had a gift for finding people, and he was like really well known and famous. So obviously the top artists wanted to do work with him. And that artist, I would love to have seen that artist do a tarot deck, but maybe the two cards that he switched around, I don't agree with the switching of those cards. This wheel seems to lack a sense of continuity to me. And like there's little tiny little things which have bugged me about him. And then the fact that in his later life, he struggled with addictions. Yeah. From what the people who were close to him have basically said. And that seems to be so he struggled with addictions. And to me, like if you were like really practicing high level magic in an enlightened way, I don't think you'd be struggling with addictions. I think you'd be pretty much in control of your space. You'd be pretty much in control of yourself, and you'd be making choices. You wouldn't be being driven by your own desires, like, a cow being pulled by a thing through the nose, a nose ring. So that these are my challenges with Aleister Crowley, and like some of his morals seemed a bit dubious, but to me he seemed like a highly arrogant, egotistical guy who was like I know better than everybody, and I've got all this great knowledge and power. And then he went off and he announced that he was going to do this great ritual, and then after that he got burnt. That was in that house in Wales. I think it was in Wales. Yeah. And he got his fingers burnt because he played with big toys that he maybe wasn't able to wield. So do you see where I'm coming from? For me, it's not so much about the morals. It seemed like he was overstepping. And I wonder whether a lot of his work was, there's a lot of good inspired stuff. Like you read 777, right? There's some very interesting insights there. But at the same time, there's also some questionable things. So for me, I take him with like a pinch of salt, you know. But I also agree with you. Like I'm not prone to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I won't call him a prophet.
I mean, I would have to get a little bit deeper into any particulars because I don't recall him ever saying something was going to happen and then after he died, it happened, right? Or something like a prophet has to have a track record in their lifetime, you know, really, actually, when you think about it, of saying something's going to happen. And you're pretty sure this guy can't possibly be in the know. And then that's it, right? And you can't say that this guy couldn't possibly be in the know. He was too, you know, he was too much on the radar. He, you know, like he was part of the game for whatever reason. Like how did him, when you look at all the stuff that, if you look at what got him attention in his day, you kind of almost scratch your head, right? Like that doesn't sound like a big deal. Like the stuff that they were actually like saying about, just because nowadays, like people do all sorts of weird stuff like that, right? It's like, a lot of times you look and you see some ugly stuff going on, making a disturbance to the pleasantness of the environment. Like this is, you know, kind of like you see this a lot in cities and things like that. You know, you realize that there's been an insertion of some sort of chaos magic on a certain level being instituted in a crude fashion, like, you know, street level, like low magic. Right? But based on the exact same premises of all sorts of things. You know, if you've got media attention, you're looking for scandalmancy. Scandalmancy is your weapon. President Trump used scandalmancy to great effect as soon as they were starting to talk about him in tabloids. Right? And then that carrying on all the way through to the point where he superseded the usual mainstream media's psyche with the public, and then changing the way all of that happened, right? So you use the scandal in that manner instead of letting the scandal destroy you. You know, it's part of owning it. You know, they called him a beast before he called himself a beast, I believe, or he called himself the beast once for a thing, and then it like the media ran with it and he kept it. Is something like that, right? But the beast didn't start out as like as anything like in that respect. It was the press. The press, you know, like, and he laughed at this. So like, yes, that's like, he wanted to be known as a villain. He wanted to, because it was a big joke to him, right? Because he's theoretically not doing anything wrong, right? Like theoretically, Charles Manson did nothing wrong. When you get down to the what he provably did that was such a crime, was telling people that fucking listened to him as if he had authority over them. And on his opinion of not liking the person existing on the planet, taking that to bank, saying, make Charles happy, make him no longer alive on the planet anymore. And that's how all these people around Manson were dying. And whether you believe that Manson was orchestrating thing by order, or just a guy spitting off how he didn't like some motherfucker for some fucking reason. Right? And that's not drawing any of the other context of the situation that makes him belong in prison. But it is about the question of exactly why is he serving like a murder sentence for not really murdering anybody, right? You know, because you have to see the man to have the charges and the sentence seem that appropriate, right? Charlie didn't use scandalmancy very well. He sucked at it.
Yeah, that scandalmancy is powerful magic. The Trumpteferian has definitely got his magic beans.
If you're gonna be a personality who decides to step up, right? You know, because like right now, right? Like this is all very intimate. You know, it's several dozen people. It's the niche audience. I don't have to explain. Oh, excuse me. I don't have to explain 50 million fucking things to get to a point, because we all understand where we're coming from on sensitive and controversial subjects. Right? So, I would have to use scandalmancy because somebody could easily call me horrible names, and I have to act as the shadow reflection of what they're projecting onto me.
Yeah, I often wonder whether he was part of something bigger. That was my thought. My thought of his associations was like, we see it now in the media, in our advertising, in our television, the occult, the dark occult expression, which is sort of we've covered it quite a lot, especially like those Kentucky ads. I mean, they're just getting ridiculous. And the advert for Nike, the Nike Air ad, where it's like demons playing a football, and it seems like it's being popularized, right? And I think he was the forerunner to popularizing it. And I wonder whether he was part of a clique, like the whole story of him going and publicizing the Golden Dawn information, right?
All of the mystery.
I wonder whether he was really at odds with them, or whether it was all a carefully orchestrated thing. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. All of the mystery over the course of the 19th century had gotten sucked out of religion, right? There was no more, there was devoid of like the mysticism and things like that. The mystery was choosing to be focused on the secular side of things through scientific institutions. We're becoming like the mystery schools or whatever. So you've got this scientific thing being the new thing to fulfill the reflection of the self in the soul, right? And so this was a void where pagan traditions was beginning to fill in, right? You know, the time of the rise of Aleister Crowley is also the rise of the folk movement in Europe. The folk movement gets co-opted by the National Socialists as the conditions worsen during the post-Great War era, and the crushing economic factors that had nothing to do with the goodwill agreement between men. And so that became all these factors for where we get our 20th century early occultisms, our Madame Blavatsky's and our Aleister Crowley's, our Manly Palmer Hall's, etc., etc. They're all coming out fulfilling this vacuum that nobody wants to touch in religion and science.
I would say that's probably, there's a lot of that. There was a shift coming. So there was like damage control, all hands on deck, you know. And in his case, it was all hands on deck too, you know. If you can have your hands on deck, let's have them on deck. I think like that was the beginning of like a new woke era, almost, you know, the way I see it, where it was very subtle, but like, you know, these cycles come. And I think that the Dark Brotherhood wanted us to, they needed somebody to hate, right? And he took that seat, hot seat. But I think he was part of something. It was an orchestrated thing. I don't think he just did it on his own. This is what my gut says to me. And please get into bed. I'll come and tuck you in a minute. I love you more than anything in the world.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Shoot.
like, yeah. Well, you know, he was what, Oxford, right? You know, he was this prestigious. He went to Ivy League. He wasn't a you know, he wasn't like the high ups, right? We're talking about a mid upper, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg, you know, like his relationship to Harvard, for instance, right? I see that as an equivalent kind of relationship to Oxford, because he wasn't like a top guy, but he got in because of the circumstances, right? Mark Zuckerberg, you know, granted, slightly bad example because Mark Zuckerberg is a Rockefeller. You know, Crowley's bloodline is something, but it's not quite as good as them. But the point is that he's still, even though being one of the secret Rockefeller types, he's you know, he wasn't top of their Ivy League situation, but he was in there for it, right? You know, sometimes these guys are there to play the Promethean archetype. They're in there to be like, you know, he's the good Titan who takes what the gods have stolen from man to give it back to them. You know, this whole stealing of the fire situation, right? So Crowley stole the fire of Oxford occultism and gave it to the world in his own system, and thus he became the most hated man for that reason. But they had to make up another reason because they didn't want to sound like the bad guys.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that in there, but I also think that like they wanted somebody to give the fire to the people. I think it was planned. And like you say, I think his bloodline was like intermediate bloodline, not top ranking, but maybe because of his ability.
Yeah.
He was in that little clique because
Right.
he earned his place there because of his devout study and practice of the occult, which was real. Like the dude really was. He was an occultist. There's no question about that. He's not a fake. But yeah, like I think he earned his stripes. He didn't just inherit it like because of mom and dad and because of my bloodline. He had a bit of good blood in him, but he had to really prove himself. So he probably set out to prove himself and did prove himself to all of the, you know, I think he joined the Golden Dawn in the late 1800s. Yeah. Just before, was it the late 90s or the mid-late 90s or something? That's when he was like officially taken into the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because Golden Dawn is a more right-hand path situation, right? You don't apply Golden Dawn magic the way Thelema applies magic, but Thelema has a very kind of like Lokian mockery to it, where it wants to take everything and just do its own thing with it, right? And there's a right way of adopting stuff into your system, and then there's a way that can be problematic, right? And especially if you're going to be dishonest about where stuff is coming from.
Yeah. So I reckon it's 3.5 hours. I was wanting to try and keep this show a little short.
Yeah, I was getting ready to bow out, actually. It's a good time.
Yeah, lovely. It's my boy's birthday tomorrow, Joshua Eli's birthday, so I must go and give him a kiss and tuck him in for real. And I got to be up Compass Mentis tomorrow. Got to go and do the mountain climb before I make sure that his day is a fun day.
Yeah.
He's turning 9. I bought him a little air gun rifle. So he's so super excited because it's the first thing that he's going to have that actually can shoot. And I told him I'm going to teach him how to shoot because, you know, he wants to learn to shoot. So I'll teach him to shoot like properly, safely, you know, get a little air gun. I think it's good for boys to learn to the discipline necessary of dealing with those kind of devices. But yeah, man, I hope you guys in the chat have enjoyed the show. If there's any last bits you guys want to throw on the table, Indy and Zeralat, now is the time.
Long live Ozzy, long live Hulkamania.
I think I'm good.
Well, it's been an honor, guys. It's been an honor to everybody who's been in the chat. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. It was a fun discussion. I'm sending you all so much love. Big blessings. Take it easy. Keep the smile alive. And yeah. Enjoy next week. We've got a powerful alignment of planets. What is it? Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus. Is it Uranus and Neptune? Is that right? It's a pretty powerful alignment of planets coming next week. So it's going to be all engines go, time to manifest, time to like really channel those forces because a lot of things are going to be moving in the same direction.
Right. It's all in Gemini,
yeah,
right? I think they're all gathering in Gemini or something, right?
The magician, yeah.
Yeah.
Time to make things happen, man. Align, communicate, and promulgate. Sending you all big love, big blessings, peace, honor, respect. Take it easy, and so much love to you. Thank you for coming.